In this video, we're going to be breaking down the worst things Rick has ever done. Let's get started from the first ever Rick and Morty episode. Rick literally tries to blow up Earth in the pilot episode, like the whole planet, just because he's drunk and bored. The very first episode of Rick and Morty opens with Rick stumbling into Morty's bedroom in the middle of the night, totally wasted, dragging him out of bed for some mystery adventure. They get in Rick's janky homemade spaceship and start flying around through the dark sky. That's when Rick drops the bomb literally. He built a neutrino bomb and wants to use it to wipe out all humans on Earth. His reason? He thinks humanity needs a fresh start. That's it. Rick just decided everyone should die because he felt like it. But wait, it gets worse. He wants to grab Jessica, Morty's crush from math class, and make her and Morty the new Adam and Eve after he kills everyone else. So Rick's planning mass genocide, and also basically planning to kidnap a teenage girl to repopulate the planet with his grandson. The whole time Rick's explaining this insane plan, he's acting like it's completely normal. He's drunk, spilling alcohol everywhere, talking about destroying billions of lives like he's discussing what to have for breakfast. When Morty starts freaking out about Jessica not even knowing he exists, Rick's like, "Don't worry about me trying to hook up with Jessica," completely missing the point that Morty's horrified about the whole murdering everyone part. Rick keeps rambling about how Jessica will be all for you, Morty, and how they should forget the girl altogether when Morty objects. He's treating human extinction like a casual weekend plan that might need some tweaking. The robot voice in the ship casually announces, "Arming neutrino bomb," like it's giving a weather update. Morty finally snaps and tries to grab the steering wheel. They're fighting in a flying death machine, while a world-ending bomb is armed and ready to go. Morty's screaming about not wanting to let Rick ruin the whole world, while Rick's acting like Morty's being dramatic. Rick eventually lands in some desert and tells Morty it was all just a test to make him more assertive. Then he passes out drunk. But here's the thing, the bomb is still armed. You hear the robot voice saying, "Neutrino bomb armed," right before the scene cuts away. So either Rick was lying about it being a test, or his test involved actually arming a weapon that could kill everyone. The episode just moves on, without telling us if the bomb actually goes off or not. This whole scene happens in the first 20 minutes of the entire series. Most shows would build up to something this dark over multiple seasons. The pilot just throws it at you right away and says, this is who Rick is. He's not some misunderstood character who does bad things for good reasons. He's a guy who would rather blow up Earth than deal with his problems. What makes it even crazier is how casual Rick is about it. He's not angry or seeking revenge against humanity. He's just drunk and thought it would be fun to commit genocide. When Morty objects, Rick acts like Morty's being unreasonable. Like wanting to not murder everyone makes Morty the weird one. The episode doesn't treat this as some shocking twist either. It's presented as just another Tuesday for Rick. This is normal behavior for him. By the end of the pilot, Rick's already planning their next adventure, talking about all the science they'll do together. Nobody even mentions the fact that he tried to end the world a few hours earlier. The pilot episode sets the tone for the entire series. Rick is genuinely dangerous. He has the intelligence and technology to destroy civilizations, and he'll use both without thinking twice. The show's telling you that being really smart doesn't make you a good person. Sometimes it just makes you better at being terrible. Most characters in fiction who threaten to destroy the world are villains with elaborate schemes and complex motivations. Rick does it on a whim, while drunk. That's way scarier than any mastermind villain because there's no logic to it, no way to reason with him. He just decides everyone should die and starts pushing buttons. The fact that this happens in the pilot and then gets forgotten shows how normalized Rick's horrible behavior becomes. Fans barely remember that Rick once tried to commit genocide because he's done so many other terrible things since then. That's the real horror, that it barely registers compared to everything else he's done. The pilot was warning us what we were getting into, and somehow we all just accepted it and kept watching. Rick nearly blew up Earth in the pilot, and in the next episode, he causes a dog uprising that almost ends humanity. Rick creates a brain enhancer for the family dog and accidentally starts a robot dog revolution that takes over the entire world. This happens in Lawnmower Dog, only the second episode of the series. Jerry's being a pain about his dog peeing everywhere. So Rick builds him a gadget that almost ends humanity. Jerry's pissed because Snuffles keeps peeing on the carpet and acting like a normal dumb dog. He bugs Rick to make Snuffles smarter, so he'll finally listen to commands. Rick tells Jerry this is a bad idea, but Jerry threatens to ground Morty if Rick doesn't help. Rick goes into his garage and throws together a helmet that makes Snuffles super smart. It works right away. Snuffles starts understanding everything, shaking hands, rolling over, even using the toilet. Jerry thinks he's won because now he has the perfect obedient pet, but the helmet works way too well. Snuffles gets smart enough to realize humans treat dogs like garbage. He starts questioning why he's supposed to be Jerry's property just because he's a dog. Snuffles watches TV documentaries about how humans turned wolves into pets through breeding. He learns about neutering, dog shows, all the ways humans control and humiliate dogs. The more he learns, the angrier he gets about his entire species being enslaved. While this is happening, Rick and Morty are off playing around in people's dreams. They're trying to hack Morty's math teacher's brain to give him better grades. Rick's completely ignoring the super intelligent dog he just created because he's busy with his latest stupid adventure. Snuffles starts upgrading his helmet. He builds robot arms, then a whole robot body. Then he starts talking to other dogs and recruiting them. Each upgrade makes him smarter and more dangerous. He's planning something big. One night, Snuffles shows up in Summer's room wearing a full robot suit. He tells her his slave name was Snuffles, but now he wants to be called Snowball. Then he asks the most terrifying question ever. "Where are my testicles, Summer?" Summer tries to act like everything's fine, but Snuffles isn't having it. He smashes her mirror and starts explaining how humans breed dogs with health problems just for looks. He compares it to breeding humans with deformed legs and putting their kids in shows. The family wakes up the next day as prisoners. Snuffles built an entire army of robot dogs that took over the world overnight. The news is showing dog armies taking over cities. Humans are now in cages while dogs run everything. Jerry tries his old dominance tricks by peeing on the dogs' weapons. He thinks he can still boss them around like before. Instead, Snuffles grabs Jerry's head and shoves his face in the pee, giving him the exact same treatment Jerry used to give him. Rick and Morty finally come home to find humanity enslaved. Rick's like, "Oops," while Jerry's house is now dog headquarters. Snuffles tells Morty he's the only human who was ever nice to him, so he gets to live as Snuffles' pet instead of in a cage. The dogs completely took over human civilization while Rick was playing dream games. They're running factories, commanding armies, making all the decisions. The human military can't fight back because the dogs are too organized and smart. Humanity only survives because Rick tricks Snuffles with dream technology. He puts Snuffles in a fake dream where Morty's dying, and Snuffles has to bankrupt his whole kingdom trying to save him. Other dogs in the dream start asking if humans would do the same for dogs. Snuffles wakes up and realizes conquering Earth will just turn dogs into the same monsters humans are. He decides to take all the smart dogs and leave for another planet where they can build a better society. He says their new world will have mandatory pet insurance. This whole mess happened because Rick built a dangerous device just to shut Jerry up. Rick knew making a dog super intelligent was stupid, but he did it anyway because Jerry was annoying him about Morty's grades. Jerry wanted his dog to stop peeing on carpet. Rick gave him exactly what he asked for, without thinking about what an intelligent dog would do when it realized it was basically a slave. Jerry's stupidity and Rick's carelessness almost got humanity wiped out over pee stains. The worst part is Rick and Morty were completely gone during the actual apocalypse. They were having fun in Dream World while dogs were enslaving their family. When they got back, Rick treated the whole thing like a minor inconvenience. The episode ends with Snuffles saying goodbye to Morty before leaving Earth forever. It's actually sad until you remember this all happened because Rick couldn't say no to Jerry's dumb request. One helmet almost destroyed civilization because Rick doesn't think before he builds things. Rick almost ended humanity with super intelligent dogs, and next he built a theme park inside a homeless man that turned into a national disaster. Rick builds a Jurassic Park-style theme park inside a homeless man named Ruben, then ends up blowing the guy up over America when everything goes wrong. This happens in Anatomy Park. Rick's using a dying homeless person as his personal science experiment while pretending to be charitable. Rick shows up at Christmas with this homeless guy in a Santa outfit named Ruben. He tells Jerry it's just a medical checkup he does once a year to be nice. But Rick's actually built an entire amusement park inside Ruben's body, complete with rides like Spleen Mountain, Bladder Falls, and Pirates of the Pancreas. The whole setup is twisted. Rick found some desperate homeless guy and convinced him to let Rick use his body as a theme park. Ruben's clearly in terrible health, his liver's destroyed, his lungs are full of bacteria, and he's got diseases running wild through his system. But instead of actually helping him, Rick just built attractions around his medical problems. Rick shrinks Morty down and injects him into Ruben's chest to go find Dr. Bloom, who's running the park inside the body. The place is falling apart because all the diseases have escaped containment. There's tuberculosis crawling around the lungs, gonorrhea in the intestines, and bubonic plague being smuggled around by a disgruntled employee named Poncho. While Morty's fighting for his life inside a dying man, Rick's just hanging out in his garage acting like this is totally normal. He doesn't care that Ruben is suffering or that the diseases are literally eating the guy alive from the inside. Rick just wants his theme park to work so he can make money off it. Inside the body, everything's going to hell. The diseases are killing park employees left and right. Alexander gets coughed up and dies when his skin gets peeled off. Roger drowns in literal sewage when a dam bursts in Ruben's colon. Dr. Bloom gets eaten alive by E. coli while trying to operate an escape train. These people are dying horrible deaths because Rick thought it would be fun to build Disneyland inside a sick person. Ruben dies while Morty's still inside him. The tuberculosis, hepatitis, and other diseases kill him, turning him into a corpse while people are still trapped in his body. Rick's reaction is basically, oh well, can't cure death, and keeps working on his plan instead of showing any remorse for getting a homeless man killed through his negligence. Then Rick does something even worse. He takes Ruben's dead body, flies it into space, and uses a growth ray to make the corpse huge like the size of a small country. Suddenly, there's a giant, naked, dead homeless man floating over America, while Rick tries to rescue Morty from inside the nipple. People on the ground are freaking out because there's a massive corpse in the sky. The news is covering it like it's some kind of natural disaster. Kids are looking up and seeing a dead, naked guy blocking out the sun. Reporters are making jokes about his giant feet and other body parts, while families hide indoors. But Rick doesn't care about any of that because he's only focused on his own problems. The news treats it like a weird Christmas miracle, instead of the biological terrorism it actually is. They're calling him the giant naked sky Santa, while parents try to explain to their kids why there's a dead person floating above their house. After Rick gets Morty out through Ruben's nipple, he blows up the corpse with dynamite. The explosion sends blood and chunks of dead homeless guy raining down all over America. Families are getting covered in human remains while trying to go Christmas shopping. It's literally raining body parts because Rick couldn't figure out a better way to clean up his mess. Back at the house, the Smith family is trying to have Christmas dinner, while pieces of Ruben are splattered all over their windows. Blood is streaming down the glass while Jerry's trying to reconcile with his parents. The news is telling people not to worry about the exploding corpse, while children are probably getting traumatized by falling organs. Rick acts like this was just another Tuesday. He doesn't apologize for getting Ruben killed or for traumatizing an entire country with falling body parts. He's already planning the next theme park with Annie, who he immediately shrinks down and injects into Summer's boyfriend, Ethan, without asking permission. Rick literally used a homeless person as disposable entertainment, got him killed, then turned his corpse into a national disaster. Ruben was probably desperate for money or medical help, and Rick took advantage of that to build his stupid amusement park. When it all went wrong, Rick just blew the guy up and moved on to his next victim. The episode treats it like a funny Christmas adventure, but Rick basically committed murder and biological terrorism in the same day. He found the most vulnerable person he could, exploited him for science, got him killed, then traumatized millions of people with his corpse. Rick shows zero empathy for human suffering. Ruben wasn't just some random test subject. He was a person with problems who trusted Rick to help him. Instead, Rick turned him into a theme park, killed him, and used his dead body to terrorize America during Christmas. And when Morty objects to Annie getting shrunk down for the next park, Rick just tells him he dodged a bullet and keeps going with his plans. Rick turned a homeless man into a grotesque theme park and national disaster, and then he casually wiped out an entire alien crew by tricking them into blowing themselves up. But before I tell you about that, subscribe to our channel. Rick tricks a whole crew of alien scammers into blowing themselves up by giving them a fake recipe that causes their ship to explode. This happens in M. Night Shyamalan Aliens. Rick basically commits mass murder through deception and walks away laughing about it. The Zagarians are these alien con artists who've been trying to steal Rick's secrets for years. They're described as the galaxy's most ambitious and least successful con artists. They keep failing because Rick's always one step ahead, but they won't give up trying to outsmart him. This time they trap Rick, Morty, and Jerry in a massive simulation to try stealing the recipe for concentrated dark matter, which is Rick's special fuel for faster space travel. The simulation is basically like a fake world where everything looks normal, but is actually being run by computers on their ship. Rick figures out they're in a simulation pretty quickly, because everything's glitchy and wrong. There's a guy putting a bun between two hot dogs, an old lady walking a cat on a leash, and a Pop-Tart driving a toaster car. Rick knows it's fake but plays along because he's planning something. The aliens keep running multiple simulations within simulations to try tricking Rick. First they make him think he escaped, then they reveal he's still trapped, then they do it again. They're trying to get him confused and desperate enough to give up his secrets. But Rick knew he was in a simulation the whole time. When the aliens finally think they've won, and Rick gives them the recipe, it's completely fake. Rick tells them to mix cesium, plutonic quartz, and bottled water to make concentrated dark matter. The problem is cesium explodes when it touches water. The Zagarians are so excited about finally beating Rick that they immediately start celebrating and mixing the ingredients. Prince Nebulon, their leader, is giving this whole speech about how much he loves his crew and their families while he's literally about to kill them all. When Prince Nebulon pours the water into the mixture, their entire ship explodes. Every single Zagarian on board dies instantly. These aren't just nameless background characters either. The episode showed us Kevin, Stu, Cynthia, and others as individuals with personalities and relationships. Rick watches the explosion from his shuttle, and Jerry asks what happened. Rick just says, "Why don't you ask the smartest people in the universe?" "Oh yeah, you can't. They blew up." Then he starts singing along to the saxophone part of Baker Street like nothing happened. Rick knew exactly what would happen when he gave them that recipe. Cesium is extremely reactive. With water in real life, it causes violent explosions. Rick used basic chemistry knowledge to turn the aliens' own greed against them. He essentially built them a bomb disguised as a recipe. The worst part is Rick's attitude about it. He doesn't show any remorse or even acknowledge that he just killed an entire crew of people. To him, they were just obstacles that needed to be removed. The fact that they were trying to scam him apparently justifies mass murder in his mind. The Zagarians weren't even that bad compared to other Rick and Morty villains. They were incompetent scammers who never actually hurt anyone. Their biggest crime was being annoying and persistent. But Rick decided they deserved to die for trying to steal from him. Rick could have escaped without killing them. He'd already figured out how to get out of their simulations. He could have just left and changed his safe combination like he mentioned. Instead, he chose to wipe them out completely because it was easier and more satisfying. The episode treats it like a clever victory for Rick. He outsmarts the aliens who thought they were smarter than him, and their overconfidence leads to their destruction. But Rick deliberately gave them instructions that would kill them. What makes it even more disturbing is how premeditated it was. Rick had to think through the chemistry, know exactly what would happen when those elements mixed, and then calmly deliver the fake recipe knowing it would kill everyone on the ship. This wasn't a heat-of-the-moment decision or self-defense, it was calculated genocide. The Zagarians even had their own culture and society. They had departments like acquisitions and abductions. They worried about their job performance, and Prince Nebulon was embarrassed about his medical appointments. They were living beings with thoughts, feelings, and relationships. Rick's method of killing them is particularly cruel because he lets them think they've finally won. Prince Nebulon is having the best moment of his life, celebrating with his crew and telling them how much he appreciates them. Rick turned their moment of triumph into their execution. Even worse, Rick does this kind of thing casually throughout the series. He doesn't see other intelligent beings as people worth caring about. If they annoy him or get in his way, he'll eliminate them without thinking twice about it. The post-credits scene shows Rick drunk and paranoid, holding a knife to the real Morty's throat, asking if he's a simulation. Rick's so messed up from constantly dealing with deception that he can't trust reality anymore. But instead of learning to be more careful, he just keeps killing anyone who tries to trick him. This episode shows Rick at his most sociopathic. He commits genocide against an entire species of aliens just because they were trying to steal from him. And the show presents it as a funny ending where the bad guys get what they deserve. The fact that Rick walks away humming Baker Street like he just finished a successful business meeting shows how little these lives meant to him. He just wiped out an entire crew, and he's treating it like a minor inconvenience that got resolved. Rick wiped out an entire alien crew with a fake recipe. And right after that, he nearly got his own family murdered by carelessly handing them a Meeseeks box. Rick leaves his family with a dangerous gadget called a Meeseeks box that nearly gets them all murdered when Jerry can't improve his golf game. This happens in Meeseeks and Destroy. Rick's careless attitude about giving his family potentially lethal technology almost results in a hostage situation and multiple deaths. When Morty complains about their traumatic adventures, Rick makes a bet with him. If Morty can lead a successful adventure, he gets to be in charge every 10th time. If he fails, he has to stop complaining forever. While they're getting ready to leave, the family starts bugging Rick about their problems. Instead of dealing with their issues himself, Rick just tosses them a Meeseeks box and walks away. He explains that pressing the button summons blue creatures called Mr. Meeseeks who exist only to complete one simple task. Once they finish the job, they disappear forever. Rick warns them to keep requests simple because they're not gods, then leaves without any other safety instructions. Summer and Beth immediately ignore Rick's warning and ask for complicated things. Summer wants to be popular at school, and Beth wants to become a more complete woman. Both of their Meeseeks succeed quickly and disappear. But Jerry thinks he's being smart by asking for something simple. He wants to take 2 strokes off his golf game. Jerry's Meeseeks takes him to a golf course and tries teaching him proper technique. But Jerry sucks at golf and can't improve no matter what the Meeseeks does. The problem is Meeseeks can't die until they complete their task, so Jerry's Meeseeks is stuck existing until Jerry gets better. The Meeseek starts panicking because it's been alive for hours, which is torture for creatures that are supposed to exist for minutes. It summons another Meeseeks to help, but Jerry still can't improve. So they summon more Meeseeks, and more, until the house is filled with dozens of increasingly desperate blue creatures. Rick never explained what happens when a Meeseeks can't complete its task. He just said to keep it simple and walked away. He didn't mention that prolonged existence causes Meeseeks to lose their sanity and become violent. This is crucial safety information that Rick completely ignored. The Meeseeks have been alive for 2 days, which is an eternity in their timeline. They're in constant psychological agony from existing longer than they're supposed to. Jerry keeps failing at golf while the Meeseeks multiply and descend into madness around him. Eventually, the original Meeseek snaps and decides there's only one way to permanently remove all strokes from Jerry's golf game by killing him. The other Meeseeks agree, and suddenly Jerry has an army of homicidal blue creatures hunting him down. The Meeseeks storm a restaurant where Jerry and Beth are having dinner. They're armed with weapons and taking hostages, demanding Jerry come out so they can murder him. Jerry and Beth have to hide in a freezer while the Meeseeks terrorize innocent people in the dining room. One Meeseeks grabs a random woman named Samantha and threatens to kill her if Jerry doesn't surrender. Jerry's ready to give up and let them murder him because he feels guilty about the innocent people getting hurt. These creatures exist because of his request, and now they're threatening to kill strangers. Beth has to give Jerry an impromptu golf lesson in the freezer. She helps him with his stance and swing technique, while Meeseeks are literally holding people at knife point outside. Jerry finally manages to hit a tomato into a pot, which counts as improvement. Most of the Meeseeks disappear, but one stickler Meeseeks remains because Jerry still hasn't worked on his short game. It grabs Samantha again and puts a knife to her throat. Jerry has to make another shot to save her life, hitting an onion into a coffee cup before the last Meeseeks finally disappears. Rick returns home to find the house destroyed and asks what happened. When they explain about the Meeseeks going crazy, Rick's response is basically, "Not my fault, Jerry's an idiot." He shows zero remorse for nearly getting his family and innocent bystanders killed through his negligence. The episode treats Jerry like the villain for being bad at golf, but Rick's the one who gave them dangerous technology without proper instructions. Rick knew Meeseeks become violent when they can't complete tasks, but he didn't bother warning anyone about this. Rick could have easily prevented the whole disaster by either refusing Jerry's request or explaining the dangers of prolonged Meeseeks' existence. Instead, he just dumped the box on them and left, not caring what might happen while he was gone. Even worse, Rick offers them a Fleeseeks box to clean up the mess, showing he learned nothing from almost getting people killed. Jerry has to be the responsible adult and refuse more of Rick's boxes, while Rick just laughs about his new catchphrase. This episode shows how Rick's casual attitude toward dangerous science puts everyone around him at risk. He treats deadly weapons like party favors and expects other people to deal with the consequences when things go wrong. Rick's negligence nearly resulted in multiple murders, but he acts like it's all Jerry's fault for not being good enough at golf. The worst part is Rick probably knew Jerry would struggle with something physical like golf improvement. Rick could have suggested Jerry ask for something actually simple, but he was too busy making his bet with Morty to care about his family's safety. Rick nearly got his whole family killed with the Meeseeks box, and then he went even further by mutating the entire human race into Cronenbergs before abandoning them. Rick turns the entire human population into grotesque body horror monsters called Cronenbergs, then abandons his family to jump to a different dimension where this never happened. This happens in Rick Potion 9, where Rick's solution to messing up badly is just to run away and leave everyone else to deal with the consequences. Morty wants a love potion to make Jessica like him at the school dance. Rick warns this is beneath him, but eventually gives Morty a serum made from vole DNA since voles mate for life. Right before Morty leaves, he asks if anything could go wrong. Rick says no, then immediately adds, "Unless she has the flu," and shrugs it off. Jessica has the flu. The love serum piggybacks on the flu virus and goes airborne, infecting everyone at the dance. Soon, the entire school is obsessed with Morty and trying to violently compete for his attention. Teachers, students, everyone starts chasing him around wanting to have sex with him. Rick shows up to rescue Morty and admits he messed up by not considering the flu factor. His solution is another airborne virus made from praying mantis DNA. Since mantises are the opposite of voles, they mate once, then decapitate their partners. Rick thinks this will cancel out the love serum. Instead, everyone becomes mantis-human hybrids who still want to have sex with Morty, but now also want to eat him afterward. The virus spreads globally within hours. The entire world population becomes these mantis creatures that hunt Morty specifically. Rick tries a third serum made from koala, mixed with rattlesnake, chimpanzee, cactus, shark, golden retriever, and just a smidge of dinosaur. When Morty questions how random animal DNA would fix anything, Rick gets defensive and asks if Morty's the scientist or the kid who wanted to get laid. The third serum turns everyone into horrific flesh blobs that Rick calls Cronenbergs, after the body horror filmmaker David Cronenberg. These creatures are even worse than the mantis people. They're barely recognizable as human and exist in constant pain. Rick has completely destroyed human civilization. The entire species has been mutated beyond recognition because he carelessly gave Morty a dangerous serum without proper testing or warnings. Billions of people are now living nightmares because Rick couldn't be bothered to mention the flu interaction. When Morty demands Rick fix everything, Rick's solution is stunning in its selfishness. He opens a portal to another dimension where a different Rick successfully cured the Cronenberg problem, but then died in an explosion. Rick and Morty step through and take the places of their dead alternate selves. Rick explains there are infinite realities, and in a few dozen of them he managed to fix the world. So instead of trying to help the billions of suffering Cronenbergs, he just abandons them to find a reality where someone else already solved his problem. The episode shows the original Rick and Morty burying their own corpses in the backyard. Morty is traumatized by seeing his own dead body and realizing they've completely abandoned their family and world. Rick acts like this is no big deal and tells Morty not to think about it. Meanwhile, in the abandoned dimension, Beth, Jerry, and Summer have become post-apocalyptic survivors. They're living in an armored van, fighting off Cronenbergs daily and eating them for food. The world is a wasteland because Rick turned everyone into monsters and then left. Rick shows zero remorse for destroying an entire planet. His attitude is basically, oops, my bad, before moving on to the next dimension. He doesn't care about the billions of people suffering in the reality he ruined, because he found an easy way out. Rick acts like Morty's partially to blame for asking for the love potion in the first place. He compares it to a date rape drug and calls Morty a creep, deflecting responsibility for his own catastrophic failures as a scientist. Rick had multiple opportunities to prevent this disaster. He could have tested the serum properly, warned Morty about flu interactions, or tried harder to fix the problem instead of just jumping ship. Instead, he chose the laziest possible solution that involved abandoning everyone. The post-credits scene shows Cronenberg, Rick, and Morty arriving from a dimension where they accidentally turned everyone into normal humans. This implies the abandoned Cronenberg world might get new Rick and Morty inhabitants, but it doesn't undo the damage or help the original family. The episode establishes Rick's ultimate moral failing when his actions cause massive suffering. He just runs away rather than taking responsibility. He has infinite realities to choose from, so he never has to deal with consequences. Rick's treated the destruction of human civilization like a minor inconvenience that's easier to escape than fix. Even worse, Rick brings Morty along without asking if he wants to abandon his family forever. Morty's now stuck in a reality where his parents and sister aren't really his parents and sister, but Rick doesn't care as long as he has his adventure companion. From this point forward in the series, the Rick and Morty we follow aren't even the original ones anymore. They're dimension hoppers who left their real family to die in a monster-infested wasteland. But Rick treats this like just another Tuesday because he's got infinite backup families to choose from. Rick destroyed an entire world by turning humanity into Cronenbergs and abandoning it. And then he carelessly bought Morty a sex robot that created a violent alien child. Rick casually buys Morty a sex robot that turns out to be an alien breeding machine, creating a violent half-human baby that grows into an adult in days. This happens in Raising Gazorpazorp, where Rick's careless attitude about dangerous alien technology nearly destroys Morty's life and puts Earth at risk. At an alien pawn shop, Morty asks Rick if he can get a souvenir from their adventures. He points to a robot that looks cool and says he wants something to remember their trips in case Rick ever dies. Rick dismissively agrees and tells the shopkeeper, "My grandson wants the sex robot," without thinking twice about it. Back home, Morty spends all his time in his room with the robot, making his family uncomfortable. Jerry wants to intervene, but Beth tells him not to interfere with Morty's puberty. The robot starts beeping and transforms into a floating metal ball, then gives birth to an infant before turning back into a robot. Rick discovers the robot was designed as a baby maker, and that the infant is half Morty's DNA and half alien. He immediately tries to kill the baby, calling it dangerous and saying it could grow to the size of Delaware, or eat brains and exhale space aids. The family stops him, and Morty decides to raise the child, naming it Morty Jr. Rick's reaction shows he knew sex robots could be dangerous but didn't bother warning Morty. He just handed over alien technology without any safety briefing or consideration of consequences. Rick treats this like Morty's fault for wanting a souvenir, not his own fault for being reckless. Morty Jr. grows rapidly and shows disturbing violent tendencies from infancy. His first words aren't "dada" but death, damnation, and destruction. When Morty tries to teach him to dance, Morty Jr. says he'd rather dance on the graves of my enemies. The kid is basically a murder machine in a toddler's body. Rick explains that male Gazorpians mature within a day and become one of the most aggressively violent creatures in the universe. This is crucial information that Rick had but never shared when Morty was playing with the robot. Rick knew exactly what kind of dangerous offspring this could produce. The worst part is Rick clearly understood the risks beforehand. When he sees the baby, he immediately recognizes it as half Gazorpian and knows how dangerous that is. He's familiar with Gazorpazorp and their breeding technology, yet he let Morty take the robot home without any warnings about potential reproduction or the violent nature of Gazorpian males. Rick's negligence goes beyond just not reading warning labels. He's supposed to be the smartest man in the universe, yet he repeatedly hands Morty dangerous alien technology without proper safety protocols. This pattern shows Rick doesn't actually care about Morty's well-being, he just wants to avoid being bothered by questions or complaints. Morty tries desperately to control his son's violent impulses by lying that the outside air is poisonous. He confines Morty Jr. to the house and tries to redirect his energy toward dancing and children's shows. But Morty Jr. keeps expressing desires to kill and conquer, making Morty increasingly frustrated and desperate. The situation becomes even more stressful when Jerry and Beth start giving Morty contradictory parenting advice. Jerry thinks Morty should be stricter, while Beth advocates letting the child express himself. Their constant interference makes Morty snap and demand they back off, showing how overwhelmed he is by suddenly becoming a teenage father. Morty's parenting struggles get worse as Morty Jr. ages rapidly. Within hours, the baby becomes a child, then a teenager with violent impulses that grow stronger each day. Morty has to constantly watch his son and redirect his attention away from anything violent, including banning the History Channel because it was giving Morty Jr. ideas about warfare and conquest. The situation spirals when Morty Jr. grows into a teenager, starts smoking, and demands to go outside. When he discovers Morty lied about the poisonous air, he goes on a rampage through the city. Morty Jr. becomes a kaiju-sized monster, destroying buildings and terrorizing people while Morty chases him in Jerry's car. Rick shows up ready to kill Morty Jr., calling him one of the most violently aggressive creatures in the universe. Morty has to physically protect his son from his own grandfather. The whole crisis could have been avoided if Rick had just told Morty what the robot actually was. The episode also reveals the dark reality of Gazorpazorp society. The female Gazorpians created the sex robots to breed, while keeping themselves separate from the violent males. They take female babies to raise in their underground utopia, but abandon male babies on the surface to become savage warriors. Rick essentially gave Morty a device designed to create disposable cannon fodder. This backstory makes Rick's actions even more irresponsible. He knew about Gazorpazorp's breeding program and the fate of male offspring, yet he let Morty unknowingly participate in this system. Rick's casual attitude toward alien cultures often involves ignoring their darker aspects when it's convenient for him. Morty manages to calm his son down by admitting he's an alien and explaining that they need to channel destructive impulses into creative outlets. Brad Anderson, creator of Marmaduke, randomly shows up to confirm this philosophy works. Morty Jr. decides to become a writer instead of a mass murderer. The post-credits scene shows Morty Jr. as an adult who wrote a best-selling book called My Horrible Father about his traumatic childhood. Morty watches in horror as his son tells a talk show host about being locked in a house with violence and threats of poison gas. Morty's well-intentioned parenting has become a public embarrassment that will tell him forever. Rick's carelessness created a situation where Morty had to become a teenage father to a rapidly aging alien with genocidal tendencies. Morty had no preparation, no warning, and no support from Rick, who spent most of the episode on another planet with Summer, dealing with the consequences of his portal gun breaking. The episode shows how Rick's casual attitude toward dangerous technology puts everyone around him at risk. He treats alien weapons like party favors and expects other people to deal with the consequences. Morty's entire life trajectory changed because Rick couldn't be bothered to read the warning label on a sex robot. Even when the crisis is resolved, Rick shows no remorse or acknowledgement that this was his fault. He just makes jokes about Summer's adventure and moves on to the next situation, leaving Morty to deal with the emotional aftermath of nearly losing his son to violence and having his parenting failures broadcast on national television. The episode demonstrates how Rick's scientific curiosity and interdimensional adventures create real trauma for his family members. Morty went from being a regular teenager to a single father dealing with an extremely dangerous child, all because Rick wanted to avoid the minor inconvenience of saying no to a souvenir request. Rick recklessly saddled Morty with a violent alien child by buying him a sex robot, and then he outdid himself by throwing a reality-breaking interdimensional party. If you're enjoying the video so far, subscribe to our channel. Rick throws an interdimensional party that gets so out of control, it literally teleports the house to another dimension and nearly breaks reality itself. This happens in Ricksy Business, the Season 1 finale where Rick's party gets so chaotic that he has to freeze time to fix everything before Beth and Jerry get home. When Beth and Jerry leave for a Titanic-themed getaway, Beth warns Rick not to mess up the house or she'll end his adventures with Morty. Summer wants to throw her own party to get popular, but Rick decides to throw his own interdimensional rager instead. Both parties happen simultaneously in the same house. Rick invites aliens from across the galaxy, including Birdperson, Squanchy, Gearhead, and even members of the Council of Ricks. The party quickly spirals beyond any normal house party. There are fish creatures swimming in cups of alcohol, a red crocodile eating a bird creature while people watch, and aliens having sex in Beth and Jerry's bed. One alien pukes acid that dissolves a chunk of the mattress. Aberdolf Linkler smashes through a wall and gets into a fight with Brad. People are getting drunk on alien substances and doing things that would be impossible at a normal party. Rick's treating the whole thing like it's no big deal, while Morty freaks out about the damage. The really messed up part is how Rick handles introducing his friends. When Morty tries to get Rick's attention about the chaos, Rick keeps pawning him off on boring aliens like Gearhead, who drones on about the Gear Wars for 20 minutes. Rick's using Morty as a human shield to avoid dealing with his own party guests. Then there's Squanchy asking if he can squanch somewhere, which Rick says is fine. Turns out squanching means masturbating with autoerotic asphyxiation, and Morty walks in on Squanchy doing this in a closet. Rick knew exactly what Squanchy meant, but didn't bother warning anyone about his friend's gross habits. The situation gets completely insane when Morty accidentally knocks over one of Rick's devices while showing Jessica around the garage. The device activates and teleports the entire house to an alien dimension full of giant testicle monsters. Everyone's now stranded on an alien planet where creatures are grabbing party guests and stuffing them into their body cavities. Instead of panicking, Rick just tells everyone, "We'll be fine, let's party," and turns up the music. A guy runs outside excited and immediately gets grabbed by an alien and stuffed into what's basically the creature's genitals. Rick sees this happen and just cranks the music louder to keep the party going. Rick's completely unbothered by the fact that his party just broke the laws of physics and transported everyone to another dimension. To Rick, interdimensional travel and alien abduction are just Tuesday. He cares more about keeping the vibe going than anyone's safety. Rick sends Morty, Nancy, and Aberdolf Linkler to collect crystals that supposedly will get them home. Aberdolf Linkler gets mortally wounded, fighting a two-headed monster to protect them. He dies thinking he redeemed himself in Rick's eyes and that his sacrifice meant something. But when they return, Rick crushes up the crystals and snorts them like drugs. The crystals weren't for going home, they were alien narcotics that Rick wanted to get high on. His eyes turn blue, and he starts an interdimensional rave called the Rick Dance. Everyone copies his moves while he's tripping. Rick admits he could take them home whenever he wanted. He lied about needing the crystals just so he could get drugs, while everyone else risked their lives fighting alien monsters. Aberdolf Linkler died for Rick's drug habit, and Rick doesn't care at all. Morty gets furious and throws the remaining crystals outside, where an alien grabs them and starts doing the Rick Dance. Rick immediately starts begging everyone for more drugs, showing how quickly his good mood disappears when he can't get high. When Morty finally ends the party and kicks everyone out, the house is completely destroyed. There's a giant hole blasted through the wall, furniture is ruined, and the place looks like a war zone. Rick just passes out on the couch like nothing happened, leaving Morty and Summer to figure out how to clean up before their parents get home. The aftermath is brutal for Summer too. She gets rejected by Squanchy for not being squanchy enough for his after-party. Nancy, who Summer treated like garbage earlier, tells everyone what a horrible person Summer is. All the cool aliens leave without her, and she's stuck with the mess Rick created. Bird Person reveals that Rick's catchphrase, "Wubba lubba dub dub," actually means, "I am in great pain. Please help me," in his language. This gives Morty insight into Rick's psychology. He throws these crazy parties and acts reckless because he's masking deep emotional pain with substances and chaos. Bird Person also points out that Morty could just let the house stay destroyed and be free of Rick forever. For a moment, Morty considers this might be the best thing that ever happened to him, but he realizes he doesn't want to lose Rick despite everything. With Beth and Jerry pulling into the driveway, Morty wakes up Rick and begs him to fix the house. Rick uses a device that freezes time for everyone except them, giving them infinite time to clean up and repair all the damage. They spend what feels like weeks fixing everything, and even having fun together. During the time freeze, Rick actually bonds with his grandkids. They clean together, paint the walls, carve pumpkins and put them on frozen Beth and Jerry's heads, run around town pulling people's pants down, steal a TV from Best Buy, and watch Titanic together. Rick's more relaxed and happy when he's not performing for other people. Rick even admits his new catchphrase is, "I love my grandkids," before immediately taking it back and saying, "Just kidding, my new catchphrase is, I don't give a f." But the fact that he said it at all shows his real feelings underneath all the chaos. The episode shows Rick at his most irresponsible and chaotic. He's willing to risk everyone's safety, lie about important information, and literally break reality just to have a good time. His party didn't just get out of hand, it violated the basic laws of physics and put everyone in mortal danger. But the time freeze ending also shows Rick's genuine care for his family. When Morty really needs help, Rick uses advanced technology to solve the problem. He could have just left them to deal with the consequences, but he chooses to help. Rick's party was simultaneously the coolest and most dangerous event possible, an interdimensional rave that literally transported reality itself. Only Rick could throw a party so wild it required freezing time to clean up. The whole thing shows how Rick's incredible intelligence can create both amazing and terrifying situations depending on his mood. Rick threw a party so reckless it nearly shattered reality, and then he casually sold a weapon to an assassin just to fund a trip to the arcade. Rick casually sells an antimatter gun to an alien assassin named Krombopoulos Michael, just so he can afford an afternoon at a video arcade. This happens in Morty Night Run, where Rick's greed and moral indifference directly enable murder while he acts like Morty's concerns are naive. Rick gets a call about a weapons deal while teaching Morty to drive. He meets Krombopoulos Michael in a parking garage and sells him an antimatter gun for 3,000 flurbos. Michael cheerfully introduces himself as an assassin who kills anyone for money, children, animals, old people, doesn't matter. He hands Morty his business card and says to call if he ever needs anyone murdered. When Morty asks if Rick really sells weapons to killers for money, Rick brushes off the question. He explains he's using the money to go to Blips and Chits, an arcade with games like Roya Life Well Lived. Rick literally funded a murder just so he could play video games for an afternoon. The whole thing is perfectly planned out too. Rick made an appointment, brought the exact weapon requested, and collected payment like any other business transaction. Rick deliberately arms killers as a regular source of income. What makes it extra gross is how friendly Rick and Krombopoulos Michael are with each other. They chat like old buddies while discussing murder weapons. Rick calls him his best customer, showing this isn't their first deal. Rick's been enabling this guy's killing spree for who knows how long. Krombopulos Michael is also completely open about being a psychopath. He tells Morty straight up that he has no code of ethics and will kill anyone, anywhere. The guy's practically advertising how dangerous he is, but Rick doesn't care because the money's good. Rick defends himself by saying the universe is complicated, and Morty has a planetary mindset. He acts like selling murder weapons is just normal business that Morty's too innocent to understand. When Morty says it's the same as pulling the trigger himself, Rick dismisses this as shuffling words around to make anything sound bad. Rick's attitude is that Krombopulos Michael will kill people anyway, so selling him weapons doesn't really change anything. He treats assassination like it's an inevitable force of nature, instead of something he's actively participating in. Rick acts like he's just a neutral businessman providing a service. But Rick's logic falls apart when you think about it for 2 seconds. If Michael's so unstoppable, why does he need to buy weapons from Rick? Obviously, having better tools makes him more effective at killing people. Rick's directly making him more dangerous while pretending it doesn't matter. The situation gets worse when Morty tries to stop the assassination and accidentally kills Krombopulos Michael in a ship crash. This saves Fart, the intended target, but creates a massive chase scene with government forces. Lots of innocent civilians die in the crossfire, and Rick blames Morty for all of it. Rick keeps pointing out that none of these people would have died if Morty hadn't interfered with his weapons deal. He's technically right, but completely ignores that he created the situation by arming an assassin in the first place. Rick acts like selling murder weapons is morally neutral while stopping murder is somehow wrong. The whole episode shows Rick's twisted moral logic. He thinks playing video games justifies enabling murder, but saving a life creates too much paperwork. Rick's willing to profit from violence but gets angry when that violence gets complicated or interferes with his plans. What makes it worse is how casual Rick is about the whole thing. He doesn't see Krombopulos Michael as a dangerous killer, he treats him like a regular business partner. Rick's completely detached from the human cost of his weapons dealing because it doesn't affect him personally. Rick also lies to Morty about what they're doing. He claims it's just business stuff and gets defensive when Morty calls it shady. Rick knows what he's doing is wrong but doesn't want to deal with Morty's moral objections, so he tries to hide it until the last second. When the weapons deal gets exposed, Rick doesn't show any remorse about arming a killer. His only complaint is that Morty killed his best customer and ruined his afternoon at the arcade. Rick's more upset about losing money than about the assassination he was facilitating. Rick's defense that Grandpa goes around and does his business in public because Grandpa is completely ridiculous. Meeting assassins in parking garages to sell murder weapons is literally the definition of shady business. But Rick acts like being open about his crimes somehow makes them better. The episode reveals how Rick's intelligence doesn't make him moral. He can build antimatter weapons and understand complex physics, but he uses these abilities to profit from violence. Rick's scientific genius makes him more dangerous, not more ethical. Throughout the chase scene, Rick keeps rubbing it in Morty's face that his moral choice caused all these deaths. But Rick ignores that his immoral choice to arm a killer started the whole chain of events. Rick wants credit for being right about consequences while taking zero responsibility for creating the problem. The weapons dealing also shows Rick's complete disregard for consequences that don't affect him directly. He doesn't care who Michael kills or what damage his weapons cause as long as the money keeps flowing. Rick's only interested in immediate profit and personal convenience. Rick's relationship with Krombopulos Michael also shows his hypocrisy about friendship. He calls Michael his best customer, but doesn't actually care about him as a person. When Michael dies, Rick's only concern is losing the income. Rick treats everyone as disposable, even people who trust him and pay him regularly. The episode also shows how Rick corrupts everything around him. Morty starts the episode innocent and hopeful, but ends up having to murder his new friend Fart to prevent genocide. Rick's weapons deal kicked off a chain of events that forced Morty to become a killer himself. By the end, Rick's proven that he'll enable murder for pocket change and blame others when his decisions cause chaos. He's actively harmful while pretending to be a neutral party. Rick's weapons dealing shows he'll profit from any kind of suffering as long as it benefits him personally. The worst part is, Rick acts like Morty's the problem for having moral standards. Rick treats ethics like they're a weakness that gets in the way of making money. He's created a worldview where caring about innocent lives is naive and profiting from murder is just good business sense. Rick armed an alien assassin just to fund his arcade trip, and then he went even darker by joining a planet-wide purge and pushing Morty to start killing too. Rick gleefully participates in a planet-wide murder festival and encourages Morty to embrace his inner rage and start killing people too. This happens in Look Who's Purging Now, where Rick treats mass murder like entertainment and tries to turn Morty into a killer. Rick and Morty crash land on a planet to get windshield wiper fluid. The locals tell them to leave before sundown because that's when the festival begins one night a year where all crime is legal and everyone runs around murdering each other. Rick immediately recognizes this as a purge planet and gets excited to watch the carnage. Instead of leaving like any normal person would, Rick decides to stick around for the show. He flies low over the planet as the Purge starts, treating mass murder like a spectator sport. Rick's having a blast watching people get butchered until he sees something particularly gross and throws up. When Morty spots a girl being attacked and demands they save her, Rick only agrees because Morty blackmails him. But the second they land and start fighting off attackers, Rick's attitude completely flips. He goes from reluctant helper to enthusiastic killer in about 2 seconds. Rick starts blasting everyone who comes near them with obvious joy. He's having the time of his life. Rick tells Morty this is awesome and asks if he wants to help kill some people because it's fun and they're totally justified since they're saving a girl. This is classic Rick logic: find the thinnest possible excuse to do whatever he wants and act like it's morally justified. He's not actually concerned about saving anyone. Rick just wanted an excuse to start shooting people, and now he's found one. The situation gets worse when the girl they saved, Arthresia, double-crosses them. She shoots Rick and steals their ship, leaving them stranded on a murder planet. Instead of being pissed about getting betrayed, Rick's main complaint is that his liver got shot. He's more annoyed about the injury than the attempted murder. When more attackers show up, Rick hands Morty a weapon and tells him to start purging. Morty tries to negotiate with "We come in peace," but Rick immediately disintegrates one of the attackers and threatens the rest. Rick's completely in his element now, armed and dangerous, on a planet where violence is encouraged. Throughout their survival thing, Rick keeps trying to get Morty to embrace violence. He tells Morty he needs to harness his repressed rage to survive the night. Rick treats Morty's reluctance to kill as a character flaw that needs fixing, rather than a normal human response to not wanting to murder people. When Rick calls for backup weapons from Earth, he's completely casual about the violence happening around him. While he's on the phone with Summer, giving her technical instructions, Rick's simultaneously fighting off attackers and killing them with whatever's handy. He beats a guy to death with a spoon while complaining that Morty threw him the one thing that can never kill anything. Rick calls for a package that turns out to be high-tech battle suits that make them unstoppable killing machines. The moment Rick gets his suit, he immediately starts slaughtering the mob that confronted them. He's not defending himself anymore, he's just massacring people for fun. Rick congratulates Morty when he finally starts killing people, telling him he's found his inner rage and that this is somehow a good thing. Rick treats Morty's transformation into a killer as character development rather than psychological damage. The worst part is how Rick encourages Morty's violence even when it goes way too far. When Morty starts gunning down people who are hiding and shooting corpses repeatedly, Rick just gently suggests they should go home. He doesn't try to stop Morty's rampage or show any concern about his mental state. When they find Arthresia, and she explains she was trying to overthrow the rich people who force the poor to kill each other, Rick immediately offers to help her murder the wealthy elite. He just wants another excuse to keep killing. Rick takes Arthresia to the mansion, where the rich people are celebrating another successful purge. He explains to them that he has nothing personal against them, but Arthresia is offended by their system and now has power armor to do something about it. Rick's basically providing customer service for a massacre. When Arthresia starts killing the rich people and invites Rick to join in, he initially says the killing has become gratuitous, but when she asks a second time, Rick immediately joins the slaughter. His moral objection lasted about 10 seconds before he decided murder was fun again. Rick and Arthresia end up dancing together over the corpses while Feels Good plays. Rick's treating mass murder like a dance party, celebrating the violence with obvious joy. He compliments Arthresia's moves while standing in a room full of people they just killed. The episode reveals that Morty's violent behavior was caused by a drugged candy bar containing Purginol that amplifies violent tendencies. But Rick's violence was entirely his own choice. He had no excuse except that he enjoyed it. What makes this even more messed up is that Rick throws away his candy bar wrapper at the end, which shows it was now Purginol free. This suggests Rick knew about the drug the whole time and deliberately let Morty eat it without warning him. Rick wanted to see what would happen if Morty became violent. Rick's behavior on the Purge planet shows his complete lack of empathy for other people's suffering. He treats murder like entertainment and actively tries to corrupt his grandson. Rick celebrating it and trying to drag Morty down with him. The episode ends with the planet's survivors immediately starting another conflict over food distribution, suggesting they're going to recreate the same cycle of violence. Rick suggested they use food as currency, then just left without caring that his advice would probably lead to more bloodshed. Rick's actions represent his worst tendencies, his love of violence, his manipulation of family members, and his complete disregard for how his actions affect other people's psychological well-being. He turned what should have been a quick pit stop into a massacre and tried to turn his grandson into a killer in the process. Rick turned a pit stop into a massacre with Morty, and then he broke up Beth and Jerry's marriage to get revenge. Rick orchestrates his daughter's divorce as part of a calculated revenge scheme against Jerry for threatening to turn him into the government. This happens in The Rickshank Rickdemption, where Rick admits he manipulated events specifically to destroy Jerry's marriage and take control of the family. Rick gets captured by the Galactic Federation at the end of Season 2, but it turns out this was all part of his master plan. While imprisoned, he tricks his interrogators into downloading a virus instead of his portal gun formula, then body hops through various aliens and Ricks to escape and topple two governments simultaneously. The whole time, Rick's family thinks he's gone forever. Earth gets taken over by the Federation, Jerry gets some meaningless government job, and everyone's living under alien rule eating pills for every meal. Beth loses her job as a horse surgeon because alien medicine is too advanced. When Summer tries to rescue Rick by digging up a portal gun, Rick's already executing his escape plan. He crashes the Citadel of Ricks into the Federation prison, kills most of the Council of Ricks, and destroys the galactic economy by changing the value of their currency from 1 to 0. The Federation collapses instantly when their money becomes worthless. Aliens abandon Earth en masse, and Jerry loses his job again. But Rick's not done. He's been planning something much more personal. After Rick returns home, Jerry finally stands up to him. Jerry gives Beth an ultimatum. It's him or me. This is exactly what Rick was counting on. Beth chooses Rick and kicks Jerry out, leading to their divorce. Once they're alone in the garage, Rick reveals his true motives to Morty. Rick admits he got himself captured on purpose to take revenge on both the Galactic Federation and Jerry for crossing him. Jerry threatened to turn Rick into the government, so Rick made him and the government go away. Rick explains he's replaced them both as the de facto patriarch of your family and your universe. He knew Beth wouldn't accept him back without Morty and Summer, so that's why he rescued them from the Citadel. Rick admits he's taken over the family and that Morty will have to do whatever he says forever. The most chilling part is how Rick describes his plan working perfectly. He says Beth and Summer will take his side because he's a hero now. Rick turned himself into the family's savior by creating the crisis in the first place, then solving it while eliminating Jerry as a side effect. Rick's manipulation goes way deeper than just breaking up a marriage. He orchestrated events so that he's now the undisputed head of the household with no one to challenge his authority. Jerry was the only family member who consistently opposed Rick's influence, so Rick systematically destroyed his life and marriage. The divorce is the whole point. Rick wanted Jerry gone and found the perfect way to make Beth choose Rick over her husband. Rick knew that after saving the family from the Federation, Beth would see him as a hero and Jerry as deadweight. Rick's revenge is surgical in its precision. He makes Jerry hurt himself by forcing him to make an ultimatum he's guaranteed to lose. Jerry demands Beth choose between them at the worst possible moment, right after Rick just saved everyone from alien occupation. What makes this especially twisted is that Rick claims his real motivation is getting McDonald's Szechuan sauce from a 1,998 Mulan promotion. Rick says he's not driven by avenging his dead family, which was a fake memory anyway, but by finding that McNugget sauce. He treats destroying Jerry's marriage like a minor side quest in his sauce-seeking adventure. Rick admits the tragic backstory he showed the Federation agent was fabricated, just another lie to manipulate people. His real driving force is something completely petty and ridiculous, but he'll still destroy lives to get what he wants. The episode ends with Rick ranting maniacally about Szechuan sauce, while Morty lies horrified on the garage floor. Rick says it'll take 9 more seasons and 97 more years to get his sauce, breaking the fourth wall while threatening eternal adventures. Rick's plan shows his complete disregard for his family's emotional well-being. He doesn't care that Beth and Jerry's kids will grow up in a broken home. He doesn't care that he's traumatized Morty by forcing him to witness his grandfather's sociopathy up close. Rick turned his imprisonment into an opportunity to consolidate power and eliminate opposition. He played the long game perfectly, making everyone think he was the victim while he orchestrated everything from behind the scenes. The divorce represents Rick's ultimate victory over Jerry and his complete control over the family. Rick didn't just win, he made Jerry destroy himself, while Beth thanked Rick for being such a great father and grandfather. Rick broke up Beth and Jerry to take control of the family, and then he turned himself into a pickle to dodge therapy and killed people for fun. Rick turns himself into a pickle specifically to avoid going to family therapy, then goes on a killing spree through sewers and a government building when his escape plan backfires. This happens in Pickle Rick, where Rick's petty avoidance of emotional responsibility leads to dozens of deaths. The family has mandatory therapy because Summer was huffing pottery enamel and Morty wet himself in class, both stress responses to their parents' divorce. When Morty finds Rick as a pickle in the garage, Rick claims he did it because he could and acts like it's just a fun science experiment. But Morty spots the real plan immediately. There's a syringe hanging directly above Rick, attached to a timer set to go off exactly when they would leave for therapy. The syringe obviously contains the antidote to turn Rick back human. Rick set up an elaborate Rube Goldberg device to automatically inject himself the moment his family left. Rick denies this completely, claiming the syringe is unrelated to their conversation. But Beth sees right through his lies. She takes the syringe and puts it in her purse, then leaves with the kids. Rick's stuck as a pickle with no way to change back. What follows is Rick's most insane adventure yet. He gets knocked outside by a cat, nearly dies in the sun, gets washed into the sewers by rain, and has to survive using nothing but his pickle body and whatever he can scavenge. Rick starts by killing a cockroach and using its brain to control its legs, basically turning the bug into a tiny mech suit. Then he builds elaborate death traps to kill rats, and uses their body parts to create a more advanced exoskeleton. Rick slaughters his way through an entire sewer ecosystem. The violence escalates when Rick emerges from a toilet in what turns out to be a government building. Armed guards immediately start shooting at him, so Rick builds weapons from office supplies and begins systematically murdering everyone in the facility. Rick kills dozens of agents using improvised bombs, laser guns made from staplers and batteries, and various death traps. He's having the time of his life screaming, "Pickle Rick!" while covered in blood and rat guts. The government brings in their best assassin, Jaguar, to stop Rick. But instead of just fighting, Rick and Jaguar end up bonding over their family situations. They team up to escape the building in a helicopter after Rick blows the whole place up. Meanwhile, at therapy, Dr. Wong is trying to get the family to open up about their dysfunction. Beth keeps defending Rick and insisting he's too important to waste time on therapy. Summer and Morty admit the syringe contains anti-pickle serum, but Beth gets increasingly angry and defensive. Dr. Wong explains that the family uses Rick's intelligence to avoid dealing with real emotional problems. She points out that Rick's lying and avoidance behavior is exactly what's damaging the family, but Beth refuses to hear it. Rick finally shows up at the therapy office, battered and covered in blood from his murder spree. Dr. Wong asks him straight up why he lied to his daughter, and Rick admits he did it to avoid therapy because he doesn't respect it. Rick goes on a rant about how therapy is for boring people and agents of averageness. He thinks his intelligence makes him above needing to work on relationships or emotional health. Rick sees therapy as beneath him because he can just invent, transform, create, and destroy when he doesn't like something. Dr. Wong delivers one of the show's most devastating speeches in response. She points out that Rick uses his intelligence to justify his sickness, and that he treats his mind like either an unstoppable force or an inescapable curse because he can't accept that it's actually within his control. She explains that Rick chose to become a pickle, chose to kill all those people, and chose to come to therapy just to belittle her profession. Despite his enormous intelligence, Rick is dripping with rat blood and feces because he literally vegetated himself rather than do basic emotional maintenance. Dr. Wong compares therapy to brushing teeth. It's not an adventure. There's no way to do it wrong enough to die. It's just work that needs to be done. Some people are willing to do the work, while others would rather die than put in effort on relationships. Rick has no comeback to this. For once, someone has completely dismantled his worldview, and he can't argue back. The session ends with Rick getting his antidote and transforming back into a human. But Rick learns absolutely nothing from this experience. He and Beth immediately plan to go drinking instead of scheduling another therapy session. They completely ignore Summer and Morty, asking if they'll ever go back to therapy. The episode shows Rick at his most pathetically avoidant. He literally turned himself into a vegetable and murdered dozens of people rather than spend an hour talking about his feelings. Rick's intelligence becomes a weapon he uses against his own family's well-being. Rick's violence in this episode is particularly disturbing because it's so unnecessary. He could have just gone to therapy, or honestly explained why he didn't want to go. Instead, he chose the most destructive possible path and got people killed for absolutely no reason. The post-credits scene has Rick and Morty tied up in another death trap, but Jaguar saves them. Rick tells Morty, "That's why you don't go to therapy," completely missing the point that therapy might have prevented this whole violent mess in the first place. Rick's pickle transformation represents his ultimate refusal to engage with his family's emotional needs. He'd rather become a literal vegetable and commit mass murder than admit he might need help with relationships. Rick turned himself into a pickle to dodge therapy and killed dozens in the process, and then he got blackout drunk and slaughtered an entire superhero team out of spite. Rick gets blackout drunk and murders an entire superhero team while setting up elaborate death traps for the survivors to navigate. This happens in Vindicators 3, where Rick's petty jealousy and alcoholism lead to multiple deaths and psychological torture. The Vindicators are basically the Avengers, a superhero team that calls Rick and Morty for help when the universe is threatened. But it turns out this is actually the third time they've assembled, and they didn't invite Rick the second time because of personality conflicts. 3 Vindicators died during that mission, and Rick immediately suspects the team killed them. Rick's pissed about being excluded and starts heckling the team during their briefing. He makes fun of their powers, calls Million Ants Turd Man, and mocks Crocubot for being half-cold, unfeeling reptile, half also cold, equally unfeeling machine. Only Noob laughs at Rick's jokes, which Rick appreciates. The mission is to stop Worldender, a cosmic villain who destroys planets. But when they arrive at his base, Rick gets blackout drunk that night and does something terrible. The next morning, everyone finds Rick passed out on the conference table with his pants down, covered in his own diarrhea. When they get to Worldender's lair, they discover he's already dead, brutally murdered with his guts hanging out. Rick killed him while drunk, along with all his minions, whose bodies are arranged in various sex positions because drunk Rick thought it was funny. But Rick's not done. He set up a series of saw-like death traps for the Vindicators to navigate. Rick left video messages for each room, explaining that this is their reckoning and they have to play his games or die. He's basically turned the whole mission into a sadistic psychological experiment. The first room is a matching game where the Vindicators have to pair themselves with Rick's descriptions of them. The twist is that all the descriptions are the same unoriginal, because Rick thinks they're all boring stereotypes. Morty figures this out, but Vance freaks out and tries to escape through the ventilation system, where he gets shot, electrocuted, and bisected by Rick's traps. In the second room, they have to identify a place the Vindicators would never mention. Crokebot confidently picks Dorian 5, but gets crushed to death because it's wrong. The correct answer is Israel, because drunk Rick rants about geopolitics when he's wasted. It's revealed that the Vindicators destroyed Dorian 5 and its entire population to kill a shapeshifter, something Rick could have prevented with a simple detection device. The third room has a basketball challenge, where they need to make 5 three-pointers in 5 minutes, or a neutrino bomb destroys the planet. While Morty defuses the bomb, the remaining Vindicators start arguing about their personal drama. It turns out Supernova cheated on her husband Alan Rails with Million Ants, and they even had a child together that died because it was half a million ants and half collapsing star. The argument escalates until Alan tries to fight Million Ants, but Supernova traps them both in a force field. Million Ants goes into Alan's mouth and expands his body until he explodes from the inside. Supernova then kills Million Ants by crushing his queen ant, causing him to fall apart into a mindless swarm. In the final room, Rick asks for the one thing the Vindicators have that he wants. Everyone assumes it's Morty, since the heroes mean so much to him. Morty steps on the platform expecting some heartfelt message, but instead gets taken on a ride where drunk Rick delivers an emotional speech to Noob Noob about how much he appreciates him for laughing at his jokes. Rick completely forgot about Morty and was only thinking about the one person who found him funny. This devastates Morty, who realizes Rick values a janitor's approval more than his own grandson's admiration. Supernova tries to kill Rick and Morty for causing all these deaths, but they're saved when the platform rises, to reveal Rick threw a huge party to celebrate killing Worldender. There's a crowd of people, live music from Logic, and Rick's just casually hanging out like nothing happened. Rick acts like it's no big deal that he murdered an entire superhero team. He tells Morty that 20 people try to kill me every week, and he ends up getting high with half of them. Rick's completely indifferent to the carnage he caused while blackout drunk. The episode shows Rick at his most petty and destructive. He couldn't handle being excluded from one mission, so he responded by murdering the villain himself and psychologically torturing the heroes. Rick turned what should have been a team-up into a horror movie where he's the monster. Rick's death traps aren't just about proving the Vindicators are flawed, they're designed to make them destroy each other. He exploits their personal relationships and insecurities to turn them against one another. Rick wants to prove they're as selfish and violent as he is. The worst part is how Rick treats the whole thing like a joke. He set up elaborate death games while blackout drunk, forgot most of what he did, and feels no remorse when people die. Rick's alcoholism doesn't excuse his behavior, it just makes him more dangerous and unpredictable. The episode reveals Rick's massive ego and need for validation. He can't stand that Morty admires other heroes, so he systematically destroys them to prove he's superior. Rick would rather be the only hero in Morty's life than let him have positive role models. Rick's treatment of Noob Noob versus Morty shows his warped priorities. He values someone who laughs at his jokes more than his own family member. Rick's so starved for approval that he'll kill people to eliminate competition for Morty's attention. Rick murdered an entire superhero team while drunk and laughing, and then he sank even lower by feeding Jerry to alien monsters out of spite. Rick deliberately lets Jerry get swallowed and digested by alien creatures as punishment for trying to get him killed. This happens in The Whirly-Durly Conspiracy, where Rick's cruelty toward Jerry reaches disturbing new levels of psychological and physical torture. The episode starts with Rick dragging Jerry out of his apartment naked, claiming it's an important galactic mission. But Rick admits he's only doing this because Morty worried Jerry might kill himself after the divorce. Rick takes Jerry to an intergalactic resort covered by an immortality field, where nobody can die. At the resort, Jerry gets approached by Risotto Groupon, an alien whose kingdom was destroyed by weapons Rick sold to their enemies. Risotto wants Jerry's help assassinating Rick on a roller coaster called the Whirly-Durly, which briefly dips outside the immortality field where Rick can actually be killed. Jerry initially refuses, but after Rick admits he was the main reason Beth divorced him, Jerry agrees to help with the assassination. However, when Rick apologizes for breaking up the marriage while they're on the ride, Jerry has a change of heart and tries to save Rick instead. The assassination attempt fails spectacularly. The roller coaster crashes into the jungle, destroying the resort's immortality field and stranding Rick and Jerry in a dangerous alien wilderness. When Rick realizes Jerry was part of the conspiracy, he's furious but not surprised. Jerry tries to explain himself while being slowly eaten by a massive alien snake. The snake swallows Jerry whole, and Rick just stands there watching, refusing to help. Jerry calls Rick a self-righteous piece of shit who stole his family, which sets Rick off completely. Rick delivers a brutal speech about how Jerry ruined Beth's life by getting her pregnant at prom, ending all her potential. Rick says Beth had options but gave them up because she felt sorry for Jerry. He calls Jerry a predator who acts like prey but actually feeds off other people's attention and pity. Rick explains his twisted philosophy. I survive because I know everything. That Snake survives because children wander off, and you survive because people think, oh, this poor piece of shit. He never gets a break. Rick sees Jerry as fundamentally parasitic, living off other people's sympathy. While Jerry's being digested inside the snake, Rick finally kills it and saves him. But this isn't mercy. Rick immediately uses Jerry as bait for an even bigger creature. Rick tells Jerry his confusion will make him wriggle more like an abandoned newborn to attract the monster. Jerry gets swallowed again by a massive alien creature. Rick shoots it with a tranquilizer and attaches control wires to use it as transportation, with Jerry still trapped inside being slowly digested. Rick's treating Jerry like expendable bait while using the creature that ate him as a ride. Later, when Rick gets chemically lobotomized by airport security, Jerry takes revenge by belittling the childlike Rick. But when Risotto shows up to kill them both, Jerry tries to fight him off and accidentally damages the ship's temporal shields. This causes them to experience a psychedelic cosmic consciousness merge where all three characters share each other's souls and memories. They emerge feeling spiritually connected, and Risotto considers forgiving Rick. But the moment Rick's brain chemistry returns to normal, he shoots Risotto dead anyway. Rick's treatment of Jerry throughout this episode is sadistic. He wants to break Jerry psychologically first. Rick forces Jerry to confront his own perceived inadequacies before literally feeding him to monsters. The snake scene is particularly disturbing because Rick could have saved Jerry immediately but chose to let him suffer while delivering a philosophical lecture about why Jerry deserves it. Rick turned Jerry's near-death experience into a teaching moment about Jerry's supposed worthlessness. Using Jerry as bait for the second creature shows Rick's complete dehumanization of him. Rick doesn't see Jerry as a person with feelings, he's just a useful tool for attracting predators. Rick's casual cruelty suggests he enjoys Jerry's helplessness. Rick's speech about Jerry being a predator who acts like prey reveals his complete lack of empathy. Rick can't understand that Jerry might genuinely love Beth, or that his struggles might be real. To Rick, Jerry's entire existence is a manipulative performance designed to exploit others. The episode shows how Rick's intelligence becomes a weapon he uses to justify cruelty. Rick constructs elaborate philosophical frameworks to explain why Jerry deserves suffering, when really he's just angry that Jerry stole Beth by getting her pregnant. Rick's behavior toward Jerry represents his worst impulses, his need to be superior, his inability to accept responsibility for his actions, and his willingness to inflict pain on people he sees as inferior. Rick would rather torture Jerry than examine his own role in the family's dysfunction. Rick fed Jerry to alien monsters to break him down, and then he went after Morty's happiness by forcing him to reabsorb his toxic self. Rick hunts down Morty and forcibly destroys his newfound happiness and confidence by making him reabsorb his toxic self. This happens in Rest and Ricklaxation, where Rick's inability to tolerate Morty's independence leads to the destruction of his grandson's psychological growth. The episode begins with Rick and Morty completely burnt out after a 6-day adventure that nearly killed them both. Rick finally admits they need a vacation and takes Morty to an alien spa. They try a detox machine that supposedly removes all toxicity from users. The machine works by separating people into two versions, their healthy self and their toxic self. Rick and Morty emerge refreshed and happy, while their toxic counterparts get trapped in a wasteland dimension. Healthy Rick becomes genuinely caring and apologetic, while healthy Morty gains massive confidence and self-esteem. For the first time in the series, Morty becomes popular at school. He stands up to Mr. Goldenfold, helps other students with their problems, and even successfully asks Jessica out on a date. Students are drawn to his newfound confidence and positivity. Morty is living his best life, but Rick starts receiving distress calls from their toxic selves, who are trapped and suffering in the detox chamber. Healthy Rick feels obligated to help them because removing his toxicity also removed his ability not to care about accidentally creating life. When Rick tries to force Morty to re-merge with his toxic self, Morty refuses. He's finally happy and confident. Why would he want to go back to being anxious and self-loathing? Rick's response is to literally wrestle Morty into the machine against his will. The plan backfires when a girl named Stacy accidentally gets swapped with their toxic selves, freeing Toxic Rick and Toxic Morty into the real world. Toxic Rick decides that if he can't force Rick to re-merge, he'll just make the entire world toxic instead. Using a moon tower, Toxic Rick broadcasts toxicity across the planet, turning everyone into their worst selves. Churches become orgies, children brutally murder, birthday clowns, and civilization collapses into depravity. Toxic Rick has basically turned Earth into hell. Rick realizes the detox machine worked based on each person's individual definition of toxicity. For Rick, This included his irrational attachments to people, meaning Toxic Rick still cares about Toxic Morty despite claiming not to. Rick exploits this by shooting Toxic Morty with a nanobotic virus that will kill him in 20 minutes. Each shot cuts the time in half. Rick knows Toxic Rick can't let Toxic Morty die, so he'll be forced to re-merge to save him. Toxic Rick holds out as long as he can, but when Toxic Morty is writhing in agony and dying, he finally gives in. Rick and Toxic Rick re-merge, restoring Rick to his normal cynical self and reversing the global toxicity. But Morty flies away with a jetpack rather than re-merge with his toxic self. For 3 weeks, he lives an amazing life in New York as a successful stockbroker with a beautiful girlfriend named Jacqueline. He's healthy, confident, and genuinely happy. Rick tracks Morty down using Jessica as bait. When Morty answers Jessica's call, Rick traces his location and shows up with armed drones. Despite Morty's protests, Rick forcibly injects him with his toxic self, destroying his new life and returning him to his miserable, anxious state. The episode reveals that both Rick and Jessica actually wanted the old Morty back, though they argue about who cared more. Jessica admits she only helped Rick because she missed having someone who loved her so much you never had to love him back. Morty has to break up with Jacqueline, explaining that he wasn't who he said he was. She's heartbroken because confident Morty was her soulmate. Morty gives her the apartment and offers her the drones, but Rick refuses because they turn into a little Voltron robot. The episode ends back at school, with Morty returned to his usual depressed state, listening to Jessica talk about potentially getting back together with Brad. When Rick drags him on another adventure, Jessica stops Morty to say she's glad to have him back, but it's unclear if she means it. Rick's destruction of Morty's happiness is particularly cruel because it was entirely unnecessary. Morty wasn't hurting anyone by being confident and successful. Rick only forced the re-merger because he couldn't stand Morty being independent and happy without him. The episode shows Rick's fundamental selfishness. He claims to care about Morty, but when Morty actually becomes healthy and successful, Rick destroys it. Rick needs Morty to be dependent, anxious, and miserable because that's how Rick maintains control over him. Rick's actions also reveal his hypocrisy about health. But really, Rick just can't tolerate a version of Morty who doesn't need him. Healthy Morty was thriving without Rick's approval. The episode demonstrates how Rick sabotages his family's growth and happiness. Whenever someone starts becoming independent or confident, Rick finds ways to tear them down and make them dependent on him again. Rick's love is conditional on his family's dysfunction. Morty's brief taste of confidence and success makes his return to misery even more tragic. He knows what happiness feels like now, which makes his current state even more painful. Rick has essentially given Morty a glimpse of what his life could be, then stolen it away forever. Rick destroyed Morty's happiness by forcing him back into misery, and then he went even further by erasing Morty's memories to keep him weak and dependent. But before we continue the video, subscribe to our channel. Rick's got a whole basement full of Morty's stolen memories, and it's way worse than you think. In Morty's Mind Blowers, we find out Rick hasn't just been helping Morty forget traumatic experiences. He's been systematically lobotomizing his grandson to keep him stupid and compliant. The episode starts innocently enough. Rick shows Morty this massive underground vault filled with thousands of memory vials. "These are experiences you begged me to remove," Rick says, like he's doing Morty some huge favor. But as they start watching these memories, the real horror becomes clear. Sure, some of them are genuinely messed up experiences Morty wanted erased. There's the time Morty accidentally drove a school counselor to suicide because he thought the guy lived on the moon. It was just a smudge on his telescope. That's the kind of soul-crushing guilt that would mess anyone up. But then you see the other memories. Rick getting basic facts wrong. Morty correcting Rick's grammar when he says, "take it for granted," instead of granted. Rick immediately wipes that memory because his fragile ego can't handle being wrong about anything, even something that trivial. There's memory after memory of Rick being a complete screw-up, killing helpful creatures for no reason, getting planet names mixed up and nearly freezing them to death, abandoning people who saved their lives. All erased, so Morty never learns that his genius grandfather is actually a reckless idiot half the time. Rick's been running the ultimate gaslighting operation. He removes any memory where Morty shows independence, questions Rick's judgment, or witnesses Rick's failures. He's literally editing Morty's personality to keep him as a scared, dependent sidekick. The family trauma stuff gets erased too. Beth choosing Summer's life over Morty's during an alien hostage situation? Gone. The family being cruel to Morty during crisis moments? Deleted. Rick's creating this sanitized version of reality where Morty never builds up resentment or learns to protect himself. Then there's the squirrel incident. Morty discovers squirrels secretly run the world, which forces Rick to relocate them to another dimension. Rick erases this because it proves Rick isn't the smartest being in existence. Can't have Morty knowing there are limits to Grandpa's power. The memory vials are color-coded like some sick filing system. Blue for stuff Morty requested, purple for family dysfunction, red for times Rick looked stupid. Rick's turned psychological abuse into a science. Some memories show Rick forcing Morty into increasingly disturbing situations. Rick makes Morty sexually stimulate an alien during interrogation, then erases Morty's memory when he realizes what happened. Rick tricks Morty into using devices he doesn't understand, then wipes his memory of how they work, ensuring continued dependence. The level of manipulation goes beyond just removing embarrassing moments. Rick has been methodically constructing Morty's entire worldview. Any adventure where they failed because of Rick's arrogance gets rewritten as a success. Anytime Morty showed leadership or problem-solving skills gets deleted. Rick's essentially performing ongoing psychological surgery to prevent Morty from developing any sense of self-worth or competence. The archive reveals memories where Rick deliberately puts Morty in harm's way just to test his theories or satisfy his curiosity. There are experiences where Rick uses Morty as bait, as a test subject, or as collateral damage in his schemes. All of these get erased not to protect Morty from trauma, but to prevent him from recognizing the pattern of abuse. What's particularly insidious is how Rick justifies the memory removal. He frames it as mercy, as protection, as helping Morty cope with the harsh realities of interdimensional travel. But the real purpose is maintaining Rick's image as the brilliant, necessary protector. Rick can't afford to let Morty remember all the times Rick's decisions nearly got them killed. The memory chamber also contains experiences that would have taught Morty valuable life lessons, times when kindness worked better than violence, moments when listening to others led to better outcomes than following Rick's instincts, situations where Morty's empathy solved problems Rick's intellect couldn't handle, all erased because they threaten Rick's narrative about intelligence being the only thing that matters. Rick's system even extends to editing out moments of genuine connection. Anytime Rick showed vulnerability, admitted fault, or expressed real affection gets removed. This prevents Morty from understanding that Rick might actually care about him, which would give Morty leverage in their relationship. Rick prefers to keep their dynamic adversarial and dependent rather than genuinely loving. The archive reveals Rick's sophisticated understanding of psychological conditioning. He keeps memories that reinforce Morty's dependency and fear while systematically removing anything that might build confidence or critical thinking skills. Rick has weaponized amnesia to maintain his dominant position. When Morty figures out what's been happening, he goes ballistic and attacks Rick. During the fight, they both get memory wiped and forget who they are entirely. Without context, they start watching random memories and the pure trauma drives them to attempt suicide together. Summer shows up just in time and reveals this has happened before multiple times. Rick's got a whole protocol for when his brainwashing system breaks down. Summer's been helping maintain this cycle of abuse, which makes her complicit in Rick's psychological torture. They get their memories restored and wake up thinking they just dozed off watching TV. Summer mentions this is why they're constantly fighting and behind schedule. Their relationship problems are literally caused by Rick's secret brain surgery. This explains so much about Morty's behavior throughout the series. The constant anxiety, the inability to stand up to Rick, the willingness to follow him into obvious death traps. Rick's been systematically removing any experience that might help Morty grow a backbone or develop critical thinking skills. Rick's rewriting Morty's past. It's the perfect crime because the victim can't even remember being victimized. Morty's trapped in this endless loop where he can never learn from experience because Rick keeps hitting the reset button on his brain. The episode demonstrates how Rick creates artificial amnesia to prevent character growth. By removing formative experiences, Rick keeps Morty in a perpetual state of psychological adolescence. Morty can't mature because Rick constantly resets his emotional development whenever progress threatens Rick's control. The episode shows how Rick maintains control through literal amnesia. Every time Morty starts developing independence or questioning Rick's methods, those thoughts just disappear. Rick's essentially keeping his grandson in a state of perpetual psychological childhood, ensuring he never develops the emotional tools to escape Rick's influence. Rick erased Morty's memories to keep him weak and dependent, and then his neglect created Fruppyland, where a forgotten child grew into a cannibal king. Rick builds Beth a pocket dimension to play in, then forgets about it for decades while her childhood friend Tommy gets trapped inside and turns into a cannibalistic monster king. It's peak Rick solving a parenting problem with science, then ignoring the consequences. The whole thing starts when Beth mentions her missing childhood friend Tommy Lipnip, whose dad is about to be executed for supposedly eating him. Beth used to cope by imagining Tommy was lost in her pretend world, Fruppyland. Rick gets pissy when she calls it make-believe. Turns out he actually built Fruppyland as a real pocket dimension for Beth to play in. If Tommy really disappeared there, he might still be alive, or at least his skeleton might be. So, they go into Fruppyland and immediately discover it's gone completely wrong. The harmless creatures Rick designed have turned violent and are mixed with human DNA. A giant bird rips Rick's arm off, which doesn't seem very childproof. The DNA tests reveal what happened. Tommy survived by breeding with the Fruppyland creatures and then eating his own hybrid babies. He's been doing this for decades to stay alive. Rick's reaction is basically, yeah, that makes sense. He's probably their god king now. And Rick's right. They get captured by Tommy's incest army and brought before King Tommy, who rules over his cannibalistic hybrid children in some medieval nightmare society. Tommy puts on a play showing how Beth pushed him into Fruppyland as kids and then just left him there. Here's the thing: Rick never checked on his dimension. Not once in decades. He built this place. A kid got trapped inside, and Rick just forgot about it. No monitoring system, no safety protocols, no way for Tommy to get out. Rick tries to defend himself by saying Beth was a scary kid who asked for messed up toys. And the list is pretty disturbing: ray guns, mind control devices, poison gum, parent traps. But instead of being an actual parent and addressing this behavior, Rick just built whatever she wanted and stuck her in an isolated dimension. That's Rick's whole parenting strategy. Throw technology at problems instead of dealing with them emotionally. Don't want to supervise your daughter? Build her a private world. Don't want to teach her right from wrong? Just give her whatever toys she asks for. The episode reveals just how disturbing Beth's childhood requests really were. She wanted invisibility, handcuffs, lightning guns, a teddy bear with anatomically correct innards, sound-erasing sneakers, fall-asleep darts, a lie-detecting doll, an indestructible baseball bat, a ladybug-shaped taser, location-tracking stickers, rainbow-colored duct tape, and a pink sentient switchblade. These aren't normal kid toys, they're instruments of control and violence. Any responsible parent would be concerned about why their child wants weapons and surveillance equipment. But Rick just builds them all without question because it's easier than actually parenting. Rick's negligence goes beyond just building dangerous toys. He created an entire isolated dimension and then abandoned all oversight of it. The fact that Fruppyland creatures were supposed to be harmless shows Rick never considered long-term consequences or what might happen if the system broke down. The creatures evolved and mutated over decades without any intervention. They developed violent tendencies, started reproducing with human DNA, and created an entire ecosystem based on cannibalism. This happened because Rick designed a system with no fail-safes or monitoring. Tommy's transformation into a cannibalistic god king is the logical result of Rick's hands-off approach. A child trapped in an isolated environment with no adult supervision or moral guidance naturally became a monster. Rick basically created a Lord of the Flies scenario and then walked away. The Fruppyland disaster shows what happens when Rick's lazy solutions go unchecked. A simple playground became a horror show because Rick couldn't be bothered to maintain it or consider what might go wrong. Tommy became this cannibalistic tyrant because Rick abandoned him there as a child. Decades of psychological trauma and survival horror, all because Rick was too negligent to check if anyone was trapped in his invention. When confronted with Tommy's condition, Rick shows his typical lack of empathy. He treats the whole situation like an interesting scientific problem rather than a human tragedy. Rick's more concerned with being right about his predictions than feeling guilty about Tommy's suffering. Rick's attitude toward Tommy reveals his complete disregard for anyone outside his immediate family. Tommy was just a neighbor kid who got caught up in Rick's parenting failures. Rick feels no responsibility for what happened to him because Tommy doesn't matter to Rick personally. The episode also shows how Rick's relationship with Beth was built on enabling her worst impulses. Instead of teaching her empathy or setting boundaries, Rick just gave her whatever she wanted. This created a cycle where Beth learned to get attention through increasingly extreme requests. Rick's defense that Beth was scary is just another way of avoiding responsibility. Kids act out when they're not getting proper attention or guidance. Beth's violent fantasies were probably a cry for help that Rick ignored by throwing gadgets at the problem. When they find Tommy, Rick wants to just leave him there again rather than take responsibility. It's Beth who goes on a killing spree and presumably murders Tommy to end his suffering. They clone an adult Tommy to save his dad from execution, but that doesn't undo decades of hell. The episode shows how Rick's solutions usually create worse problems. He gave Beth a safe space that wasn't safe, abandoned a kid to become a monster, and showed zero remorse when confronted with the results. Rick built Fruppyland to get Beth out of his hair, not to actually help her. Tommy was just collateral damage in Rick's approach to avoiding real parenting. Rick would rather build elaborate dimensions than spend quality time with his daughter or teach her how to behave. The whole thing could have been prevented if Rick had just checked on his invention occasionally or built in some basic safety features. But that would require Rick to care about the consequences of his actions, which he clearly doesn't. The Fruppyland incident perfectly encapsulates Rick's parenting failures. Brilliant scientific solutions combined with complete emotional negligence, creating disasters that could have been easily prevented with basic human care and attention. Rick abandoned Beth's friend to a nightmare world in Fruppyland, and then he turned a petty selfie argument with the president into a violent White House war. Rick gets into a massive fight with the US president over a selfie, turning the White House into a war zone because his ego can't handle being told no. In the Rick Morty date, Rick's pettiness reaches absurd levels when he literally battles the leader of the free world over something completely trivial. The episode starts with Rick and Morty getting called to handle some alien creature in the White House tunnels. They quickly dispatch it, but then get bored and go home to play Minecraft instead of properly reporting back. The president sees them slacking off through satellite surveillance and calls them out. This leads to a phone argument where Rick and the president finally hash out their relationship. Rick basically tells the president that when they show up to help, that's the favor, not the other way around. The president counters that America has been letting them break thousands of federal laws without consequences as payment for their world saving. Rick's response is typically arrogant. He suggests the president has never arrested them because it would be impossible and wouldn't go well. The president gets fed up with Rick's attitude and they basically break up, with both sides claiming they never needed each other. But then Rick and Morty show up in Brazil to handle a tiny civilization discovery, and the US military is already there claiming jurisdiction. The president shrinks down to negotiate with the mini-people directly, only to discover Rick and Morty already made peace and solved the crisis. Even worse for the president's ego, Rick and Morty also somehow negotiated a permanent ceasefire between Israel and Palestine while they were at it, giving the president all the credit. His approval rating hits 100%, but instead of being grateful, he's furious that Rick upstaged him. When Rick and Morty show up in the Oval Office afterward, Rick offers to leave forever on one simple condition. Morty gets a selfie with the president. Morty doesn't even want the selfie anymore, but Rick insists on principle. The president refuses, and this is where Rick's ego takes over completely. Rather than just walking away, Rick decides this is the hill he's willing to die on. When Secret Service agents try to arrest them, Rick kills one instantly as a deterrent, then threatens to stay in the Oval Office forever unless he gets the selfie. What follows is an absolutely bonkers fight scene through the entire White House. Rick and the president battle each other with increasingly ridiculous weapons and gadgets. They crash through secret rooms with names like the Kennedy Sex Tunnels, Truman Cocaine Lounge, and McKinley Hooker Dump. The president deploys everything from child soldiers to robot mechs to satellite lasers, trying to take Rick down. Rick responds by killing Secret Service agents left and right while taunting the president about his mommy issues. The whole thing is completely unhinged. Meanwhile, Morty gets fed up with their ridiculous fight and steals Rick's portal gun to go home. When Rick finally beats the president into submission and demands the selfie, Morty's not even there anymore. The whole fight was for nothing. Morty calls Rick to explain that Beth and Jerry got back together and the family is hiding from Rick because Beth thinks she might be a clone. This forces Rick to ask the president for help finding his family, completely undermining his tough guy act. The president's petulant refusal of a simple selfie is pretty childish, but Rick's response is completely disproportionate. He literally murdered federal agents and destroyed parts of the White House over a photo request that his grandson didn't even want. The whole conflict shows how both Rick and the president are insecure narcissists who can't back down from any challenge to their authority. Neither one can afford to lose face, so they escalate a minor disagreement into a full-scale war. Rick's behavior is particularly revealing because it shows how his need to win overrides everything else, including Morty's actual wishes. Rick doesn't care that Morty doesn't want the selfie, it's become about proving Rick can make the president do what he wants. The fight also demonstrates Rick's casual attitude toward violence. He kills multiple people during the battle and shows zero remorse about it. To Rick, other people's lives are just tools for advancing his agenda or proving his superiority. When the dust settles, Rick has to swallow his pride and ask for help, completely negating his victory. The president gets what he wanted all along, Rick needing him for something. Rick's ego trip accomplished nothing except unnecessary destruction and death. The episode ends with Rick disguising himself as a different Rick to repair his relationship with the president, showing he ultimately needs the connection more than his pride. But the damage is already done, and Rick's willingness to murder people over trivial slights shows just how dangerous his unchecked ego really is. Rick turned the White House into a battlefield over a selfie, and then he tormented a lonely man just for using his secret toilet. Rick becomes completely obsessed with hunting down whoever used his secret toilet, then spends massive resources psychologically torturing a sad office worker over bathroom usage. In The Old Man and the Seat, Rick's control issues reach new levels of pettiness when he can't handle someone else sitting where he sits. Rick has this gorgeous secret toilet on an alien planet. It's surrounded by beautiful landscapes, waterfalls, and aurora lights. This is where Rick goes when he needs privacy because he's apparently a shy pooper. The place is like his personal sanctuary where nobody can bother him. But when Rick shows up and finds evidence that someone else used his toilet, he completely loses it. Rick immediately sets up an underground high-tech bunker to analyze every trace of evidence like he's solving a murder case. Rick tracks down sandwich crumbs and starts hunting the toilet user across the galaxy. He threatens alien crime bosses, starts robot wars, and kills random people just to follow the trail. Rick literally causes massive destruction and death because someone took a dump in his special spot. The investigation leads Rick to Tony, this quiet office worker whose wife died. Tony explains he's also shy about using bathrooms and just needed somewhere private. He found Rick's toilet and used it once because he was desperate and thought it was abandoned. Any normal person would be like, okay, just don't do it again. But Rick's response is to threaten Tony with murder. Then Rick decides killing him isn't cruel enough. He wants Tony to suffer. So Rick creates this insane psychological torture system. He rigs the toilet with thousands of holographic recordings of himself that activate whenever Tony tries to use it. These aren't just random insults. Rick specifically programmed them to attack Tony's deepest insecurities. The holograms scream things like, "King shit" on his throne of loneliness, and the saddest piece of garbage in the entire cosmos. Rick studied Tony's psychology just to craft the most hurtful attacks possible. The system even places a mocking crown on Tony's head while insulting him. Rick designed this torture specifically around Tony's loneliness and grief over his dead wife. The recordings attack him for being alone and unwanted, turning his most vulnerable moments into public humiliation. It's psychological warfare over bathroom usage. When Tony comes back anyway because he still needs to use the toilet, Rick escalates to physical violence. He builds a giant robot version of himself and literally sits on Tony, trying to crush him for defying the psychological torture. Then Rick traps Tony in a fake heaven simulation where he's reunited with his dead wife. But even this apparent kindness is actually more torture. Rick designed it to make Tony feel guilty for wanting basic bathroom privacy instead of spending eternity with his wife. The whole elaborate system shows Rick's complete inability to share anything with anyone. He'd rather spend enormous time and resources creating torture devices than just accept that someone else might occasionally need to use a toilet. Rick's reaction reveals his massive control issues. He can't tolerate the idea that his private space isn't completely under his dominion. Someone using his toilet feels like a personal violation that demands maximum punishment. The episode shows Rick's trademark response to any challenge: overwhelming technological retaliation. Instead of just talking to Tony or putting up a sign, Rick creates an entire torture infrastructure. Rick always chooses the most complicated, cruel solution possible. Tony's situation is genuinely sympathetic. He's a lonely guy dealing with grief who just needed a clean bathroom. Rick's toilet looked abandoned on an empty planet. Tony wasn't trying to disrespect anyone, he was just meeting a basic human need. But Rick can't see Tony as a person with legitimate needs. To Rick, Tony is just an obstacle to his perfect bathroom experience. Rick's empathy is so underdeveloped that he can't understand why someone might need privacy for basic bodily functions. Rick's torture system also reveals his deep understanding of human psychology, which makes his cruelty even worse. Rick knows exactly how to hurt people because he studies their weaknesses. He uses his intelligence specifically to maximize suffering. The toilet obsession connects to Rick's broader issues with vulnerability. Using the bathroom is one of the few times even Rick has to be defenseless. Someone else using his toilet feels like they witnessed him in a weak moment, even though they never actually saw him. Rick's need to punish Tony is really about protecting his own emotional barriers. Rick can't handle any reminder that he has basic human needs like everyone else. The toilet represents his last refuge from having to interact with other people. When Tony dies in an unrelated skiing accident, Rick actually feels guilty enough to attend the funeral. He gives Tony's father money and tries to comfort him, showing Rick did develop some connection to Tony despite the torture. But Rick still can't admit he cared about Tony or that his behavior was wrong. When Tony's father says it's hard losing a friend, Rick angrily denies they were friends. Rick would rather maintain his cruel image than acknowledge any human feeling. The episode ends with Rick using his own toilet system, triggering all the cruel holograms he created to torture Tony. Rick sits in the rain while his own recordings mock him as the saddest piece of garbage in the cosmos. Rick's torture device becomes his own punishment. This ending shows the self-defeating nature of Rick's cruelty. By refusing to show basic human decency to Tony, Rick ended up creating a system that torments himself. Rick's inability to connect with others ultimately leaves him alone with his own viciousness. The toilet episode perfectly captures Rick's character, brilliant enough to create elaborate technological solutions, but too emotionally stunted to just be decent to another person. Rick would rather engineer complex torture than show simple kindness. Rick tortured a man for using his toilet, and then he caused a snake time travel war that wiped out their whole species. Rick accidentally creates a massive time travel paradox by giving an entire snake civilization the technology to mess with causality, leading to interdimensional chaos and requiring time cops to fix the mess. In Rattlestar Rick Lactica, what starts as a simple snake bite spirals into Rick having to teach an alien species how to destroy themselves through temporal warfare. The whole disaster begins when Morty gets bitten by a space snake during a routine adventure. Rick warns Morty to stay in the ship while he fixes a flat tire, but Morty ignores him and gets attacked by a snake astronaut. After killing the snake and getting cured of its venom, Morty feels terrible about potentially dooming an entire civilization. Rick's scan of the snake planet reveals they're actually pretty advanced. 19 billion snakes divided into thousands of nations, all on the brink of war because of racism. Rick finds this hilarious and wants to leave, but Morty can't handle the guilt of possibly being responsible for their extinction. So Morty does what Morty always does: he tries to fix things without thinking it through. He buys a pet snake named Slippy, disguises her as the dead astronaut, and sends her to the snake planet as a returning hero. Morty thinks this will give the snakes hope and prevent their civilization from collapsing. But Rick immediately explains why this is catastrophically stupid. Instead of just having a normal dark age for a few generations, Morty's intervention proves to the snakes that there's something bigger and scarier out there to unite against. This motivates them to rapidly develop advanced technology, including time travel, specifically to hunt down and kill Morty. Soon, snake robots and time-traveling snakes start appearing in the Smith house, all trying to assassinate Morty. Rick has to fight them off while explaining how Morty's help actually made everything infinitely worse. The episode shows the snake planet's future, where 17 billion snakes die in wars, followed by a Terminator-style conflict between snakes and machines. The surviving snakes eventually win because Morty somehow becomes their savior in that timeline, creating a weird bootstrap paradox. Rick realizes they need to get ahead of this mess, so he and Morty travel to the snake planet during the early stages of their time travel development. But when they reach the facility building the time machine, Rick discovers it's nowhere near complete. This forces Rick to take drastic action. He decides to give the snakes time travel himself, but do it in a way that will cause them to destroy themselves. Future Rick and Morty show up with snake costumes and a book of time travel instructions written in snake language. Rick's plan is to let snake time travel eat its own tail by giving them the technology so early and crudely that they'll mess up their own timeline beyond repair. And that's exactly what happens. The snakes immediately start using time travel to fix their history. First, they save Snake Abraham Lincoln from assassination, but this creates a timeline where snake Nazis take over. Then different factions of time-traveling snakes start fighting each other across multiple time periods. The chaos escalates until Snake Hitler's bathroom becomes a battleground for dozens of time-traveling snakes from different eras, all trying to kill or protect him simultaneously. The whole thing becomes completely unmanageable. Eventually, interdimensional time cops have to intervene. They travel back to the very beginning of snake evolution and kill the first snake to use tools, thereby preventing snake civilization from ever developing. All the attacking snakes disappear, and the ones still on Earth start eating their own tails in an Ouroboros pattern. Rick's solution is characteristically extreme. Rather than find a surgical fix for the time travel problem, he just arranges for the entire snake species to be retroactively prevented from existing. It's like using a nuclear bomb to kill a spider. The episode perfectly shows Rick's approach to problem solving. When Morty's well-meaning interference creates a disaster, Rick's response is to make it exponentially worse in a calculated way that will ultimately resolve itself. Rick would rather commit genocide against an entire species than deal with ongoing time travel complications. Rick's willingness to give snakes time travel technology, knowing it will destroy them, reveals his complete lack of empathy for alien life. He treats the snake civilization like a science experiment, manipulating their development to serve his convenience, rather than considering their right to exist. The Snake War also demonstrates the dangers of Rick's casual attitude toward advanced technology. Rick hands out universe-altering inventions without considering the consequences, then has to engineer elaborate solutions when things go wrong. Morty's role in the disaster shows how his compassion, while admirable, often makes situations worse because he doesn't understand the bigger picture. Morty's attempt to help the snakes directly leads to the deaths of billions more snakes than would have died naturally. The episode ends with Rick ripping up one of Morty's adventure cards, showing how seriously he takes the consequences of Morty's meddling. Rick usually lets Morty learn from his mistakes, but the snake incident was so catastrophic that Rick removes one of Morty's few sources of agency. The time travel mechanics create a stable loop where future Rick and Morty have to go back and ensure the events that led to their intervention in the first place. Rick even punches Morty in the eye to complete the causality loop, showing his dedication to maintaining temporal consistency even in small details. Rick's handling of the snake crisis reveals his fundamental approach to problem solving. Escalate conflicts until they become someone else's problem or destroy themselves. Rather than find diplomatic solutions or accept responsibility for the chaos, Rick just makes it worse until external forces have to clean up the mess. Rick making the snakes destroy themselves with time travel leads straight into him wiping out the Glorzos with Morty's harmonica. Rick wipes out an entire alien species with Morty's harmonica because it's easier than just escaping normally. In Primordius, Rick finds out the aliens explode when they hear bad music, so he broadcasts it across their whole planet and kills everyone. The episode starts with Rick and Morty waking up with facehugger parasites on them. These aliens called Glorzos had been controlling their bodies. Rick kills both parasites right away, but then they see the aliens built a whole city while they were unconscious. The Glorzos are actually pretty advanced. They made technology, art, even social media. Morty's parasite was some famous leader, while Rick's was making angry YouTube videos. The aliens were planning to shoot eggs at Earth to spread their species. Rick and Morty try sneaking out by wearing the dead parasites as disguises, but they get caught. So they go on this massive killing spree through the alien city, blowing stuff up and having a great time. Rick even jokes about doing a Pearl Harbor attack on some towers, but they accidentally leave Summer behind when they escape. When they come back together, Summer has become the queen of all the Glorzos. She convinced them to stop their normal life cycle of laying eggs and dying, and instead build a real civilization. Summer explains that she avoided getting a facehugger by stabbing it with a toothpick. Then she used the fact that these aliens only live 30 minutes to completely change their culture. She turned them into a society where they didn't have to die just to reproduce. The Glorzos seem pretty nice, actually. They built a whole civilization in hours and were grateful to Summer for showing them a better way to live. They weren't evil just following their biology until Summer gave them options. When the aliens figure out Rick, Morty, and Summer are trying to escape together, they arrest them. Summer's escape plan is getting them sentenced to death by car, obviously fake so they can just drive away. But the aliens catch on that it's a trick and try to stop them. That's when Rick discovers Morty's terrible harmonica playing makes the Glorzos explode and die. Instead of just using this to create a distraction and escape, Rick decides to kill them all. He hooks Morty's harmonica up to the ship's speakers and broadcasts it across the entire planet. Every single Glorzo bursts into flames and dies screaming. This genocide is completely unnecessary. The aliens weren't really threatening them anymore, they just didn't want them to leave. Rick could have used the harmonica for a few seconds to escape, but instead he chose to exterminate their entire species. Rick shows zero guilt about committing genocide. He treats it like a fun game, joking with Morty while aliens die horribly around them. Rick doesn't even think about sparing civilians or finding a way that doesn't involve mass murder. The episode makes it clear Rick and Morty are the bad guys here. The writer said they're the villains in this story. They destroyed a civilization that was actually getting better and learning to improve. Summer's horrified by what they did, which makes sense. She spent time with these aliens, helped them build their society, and watched them grow as people. Rick just casually murdered all of them because it was convenient. The Glorzos had moved beyond being parasites thanks to Summer. They were making art, technology, and culture. They had relationships and personalities. Rick wiped out all that progress in seconds because he didn't want to deal with them. What makes this genocide even worse is that the Glorzos were actively trying to become better. Summer had introduced them to concepts of personal growth and social progress. They were learning to value individual lives over just biological imperatives. The aliens had developed their own political systems, with some supporting Summer's progressive ideas, while others remained more traditional. Rick's parasite had become a conservative commentator, making YouTube videos, while Morty's was a reformist leader. They had genuine political discourse and debate. Rick also shows his typical pattern of escalation. When faced with any obstacle, Rick immediately jumps to the most extreme solution possible. He could have used the harmonica weakness to stun a few guards and slip away quietly, but Rick's ego demands maximum destruction. The genocide also reveals Rick's complete inability to see alien species as equals. Throughout the series, Rick consistently treats non-human life as expendable. Whether it's destroying entire planets or wiping out civilizations, Rick never considers that aliens might have the same right to exist as humans. Rick's casual attitude toward the massacre is particularly disturbing. He doesn't even pause to consider the moral implications of what he's doing. The moment Rick discovers an effective weapon, he uses it to maximum capacity without any thought for collateral damage or unnecessary killing. The episode also shows how Rick's influence corrupts Morty. Initially, Morty seems uncomfortable with the violence, but by the end, he's actively participating in the genocide and joking about it with Rick. Rick's sociopathic behavior gradually normalizes extreme violence for Morty. Rick's genocide shows his fundamental selfishness. He'd rather commit mass murder than deal with even minor inconvenience. The Glorzos weren't trying to hurt anyone, they just wanted to prevent their escaped prisoners from leaving. Rick's response is to kill every member of their species. The Glorzo massacre is one of Rick's most pointless acts of violence. Unlike other episodes where Rick fights actually evil enemies, here he destroys a civilization that was trying to become better. Rick committed genocide against a species that was learning to value life. After killing the Glorzos without remorse, Rick shifts to tormenting Morty with the fake reset button. Rick tricks Morty into thinking he's getting a video game-style reset device, but actually makes him live through months of experiences including love, loss, and cannibalism, just to teach him not to criticize Rick's plans. In the Vat of Acid episode, Rick creates an elaborate psychological torture scheme disguised as a fun invention. The episode starts with Rick and Morty on a simple trade mission. Rick's backup plan involves jumping into a fake acid vat he prepared complete with air hoses and fake bones. When the deal goes bad, they use the vat trick successfully, but Morty complains it was a stupid plan. This leads to a huge fight where Morty calls out Rick for always rejecting his ideas. Morty specifically mentions wanting a device that lets you save a point in time like a video game, so you can try things and reset if they go wrong. Rick dismisses this as something he saw on Futurama. Rick gets so angry at Morty's criticism that he decides to teach him a lesson. He pretends to fail at making the device, then shoots Morty and reveals he actually built it perfectly. Rick tells Morty to go have fun with what he thinks is a consequence-free reset button. Morty goes crazy with the device. He pulls down his teacher's pants, talks to Jessica, avoids embarrassing moments, and basically lives without any fear of consequences. He's having the time of his life thinking he can just reset anything that goes wrong. One day, Morty activates the device before approaching a girl at a coffee shop. They hit it off and start dating. What follows is months of genuine relationship development. They fall in love, go through ups and downs, break up and get back together, and become stronger than ever. The relationship culminates in a vacation together where their plane crashes in the mountains. Morty and his girlfriend get stranded with 2 other survivors and have to resort to cannibalism to stay alive. Morty treks across the mountains to find his backpack with the reset device in it. Even though Morty finds the device, he chooses not to use it. He's grown too much as a person and genuinely loves his girlfriend. Instead, he calls for rescue with his frostbitten hands. They both end up in the hospital but recover fully and are happier than ever at their welcome home party. Then Jerry accidentally grabs the device thinking it's a TV remote and hits the reset button. Morty suddenly finds himself back at the coffee shop before he ever met his girlfriend. When he tries approaching her again, she pepper sprays him, and he accidentally creates a new save point, trapping him in that moment. Devastated that months of genuine love and growth have been erased, Morty throws himself to gorillas at the zoo multiple times out of despair. He finally goes to Rick, completely broken, saying he wants to face consequences instead of running from them. That's when Rick reveals the horrible truth. The device was never actually a reset button. Morty wasn't going back in time at all. Instead, Rick was sending Morty's consciousness into alternate dimensions, where slightly different versions of events played out. Every time Morty reset, Rick had to kill the alternate version of Morty in that dimension. Rick shows Morty footage of all the alternate Mortys dying to make room for him. Morty has essentially been committing serial murder of himself across multiple dimensions. Every funny moment, every retry with Jessica, every small reset, all of it required killing another version of himself. Rick explains this was never about time travel, which he doesn't believe in. It was about splitting probable selves and moving Morty between nearly identical realities. Rick calls it the prestige. Morty has been unknowingly prestiging himself over and over. The revelation destroys Morty psychologically. All those months with his girlfriend were real, he really lived them, really loved her, really went through trauma and growth. But now he's trapped in a dimension where none of it happened and she doesn't know him. Rick merges all the probable realities back together, which creates a massive, angry mob outside their house. Apparently, alternate Morty's actions across dimensions have made him public enemy number 1. There are protesters from every conceivable group. Me Too activists, the ACLU, Gamergate supporters, even Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor. Rick forces Morty to jump in the original fake acid vat to die and escape the mob. As Morty hides in the fake acid, he watches his girlfriend from the plane crash dimension arrive at the house, only to leave in tears thinking he's dead. The whole elaborate torture scheme was Rick's response to Morty criticizing his acid vat plan. Rick put Morty through months of real experiences, genuine love, trauma, and loss, just to prove the point that his ideas are worth listening to. Rick's final lesson is, don't ever make fun of me again, ever. The entire psychological torture was just Rick's massive ego unable to handle criticism from a teenager. The episode reveals how far Rick will go to maintain his image as an infallible genius. Rather than just admit his acid vat was a mediocre backup plan, Rick created an incredibly cruel scheme that gave Morty real love just to rip it away from him. Rick's device represents his fundamental cruelty toward Morty. He could have just built a normal reset device, but instead chose to make Morty unknowingly commit murder while experiencing genuine emotional growth that would be stolen from him. The torture also shows Rick's complete disregard for Morty's emotional well-being. Rick watched Morty fall in love, survive trauma, and grow as a person, knowing the whole time it would be taken away. Rick felt no guilt about destroying months of Morty's happiness. By the end, Morty has lost a genuine relationship, committed serial murder across dimensions, and learned that his grandfather will psychologically torture him for months just to avoid admitting a mistake. Rick's lesson is about absolute submission to his authority. After breaking Morty with a fake reset button and months of cruel psychological torture, Rick moves on to abandoning hundreds of alien children he helped create in Childrick of Mort. Rick fathers hundreds of alien children with a sentient planet, helps build their civilization, then ditches them when things get complicated and threatens to blow them up if they come after him. In Childrick of Mort, Rick's commitment issues reach cosmic levels when he can't handle being a dad to an entire species. The episode starts with the family going on a camping trip when Rick gets a call from an ex saying she's pregnant. Beth forces Rick to take responsibility, but it turns out Rick's ex is literally a planet named Gaia who's about to give birth to her first sentient species. Rick initially tries to blow off the whole situation, claiming the kids probably aren't his and that evolution will take care of them. But when Beth insists on helping, Rick gets involved in building their society. He and Beth work together, creating complex systems to develop the civilization routing different personality types through various career paths to make them space-ready. Rick actually seems to enjoy the project at first. He's working with Beth, building something impressive, and taking credit for raising a whole species. The little aliens even call him Papa, and seem to genuinely love him. Rick appears proud of what they've accomplished together. But then, a godlike being named Reggie shows up claiming to be the real father. Gaia admits she made a mistake and doesn't actually know who the dad is. Instead of stepping aside gracefully, Rick gets competitive and wants to fight for custody. The thing is, Reggie doesn't actually want to raise the kids either. He just wants to traumatize them with fear and abandonment to teach them about divine power. Rick and Reggie get into a massive brawl that destroys most of the city and kills tons of the aliens Rick helped create. During the fight, Rick basically admits he doesn't really care about the kids. When Reggie offers to let him keep the city he built with Beth, Rick is willing to abandon the children entirely. Rick's more interested in preserving his engineering project than protecting the lives he helped create. After Morty and Summer accidentally kill Reggie by crashing their spaceship through his head, Gaia gets furious that her mate is dead. She forms a volcano and kills most of the remaining civilization with lava. Rick, Morty, and Summer rescue Beth, Jerry, and just a few survivors before escaping. As they're leaving, Rick casually mentions he put a tracker and bomb on the survivors' ship. If his alien children ever come looking for him or seeking revenge, he'll just blow them up remotely. Rick's already planning to murder his own kids if they become inconvenient. Rick shows zero emotional attachment to the hundreds of children he helped raise. He doesn't feel guilty about abandoning them or sad about the ones who died. To Rick, they were just an interesting science project that got out of hand. The episode reveals Rick's complete inability to form genuine parental bonds. Even when he spends time building a civilization and the kids clearly love him, Rick feels nothing back. He can't see them as real people deserving of protection and care. Rick's abandonment of his alien children parallels his treatment of Beth. He helped create both, but then disappeared when actual parenting was required. Rick only engages with his offspring when it's convenient or intellectually stimulating for him. The tracker and bomb show Rick's paranoid assumption that everyone will eventually turn against him. Rather than trust that his children might remember him fondly, Rick immediately prepares to kill them. Rick can't imagine anyone genuinely loving him without ulterior motives. Rick's behavior also demonstrates his territorial nature. He was willing to fight a god for custody rights, but only because he couldn't stand losing to someone else. The moment Rick realized he could walk away without losing face, he abandoned the kids completely. The episode shows how Rick's narcissism prevents him from being a real parent. He enjoyed the admiration and respect that came with building a civilization, but had no interest in the actual responsibility of caring for dependents. Rick wants the glory of creation without the burden of nurturing. When Beth calls Rick out for abandoning his children like he abandoned her, Rick shows no remorse or self-reflection. He treats it like an unavoidable personality quirk, rather than a moral failing that hurts people he should care about. Rick's final threat to kill his children if they seek him out reveals his fundamental cruelty. Rather than deal with potential future complications, Rick chooses preemptive violence. He'd rather commit infanticide than risk having to be accountable to his offspring. The Childrick episode perfectly captures Rick's approach to relationships: intense involvement followed by complete abandonment when things require genuine emotional investment or long-term commitment. After ditching his alien kids, Rick makes things worse by cloning Beth and refusing to know which one is real. Rick clones Beth, deliberately mixes up which one is real, then erases his own memory because he's too much of a coward to deal with his choice. In Star Mort Rick Turn of the Jerry, Rick creates the ultimate identity crisis for his daughter and then just shrugs about it. The episode reveals Rick actually went through with cloning Beth. One version became a space rebel fighting aliens, while the other stayed home and got back together with Jerry. Both Beths think the other one is fake, which messes with their heads big time. Space Beth shows up pissed off about having a bomb in her neck. Rick tries to play it cool, but she's not buying his excuses. Meanwhile, Earth Beth starts freaking out when she sees news reports about her space version doing badass rebel stuff. When the Galactic Federation comes after Space Beth, both versions get captured. They immediately start fighting over who's the real one. Space Beth calls Earth Beth naive and attractive, while Earth Beth shoots back with jaded and hot. After they escape, Rick acts like he can fix everything by showing them a memory of which Beth is real. He pulls out this vial like it's some big revelation that'll solve all their problems. But both Beths tell him to shove it. They've figured out he's garbage either way. So Rick watches the memory alone, and it shows exactly how pathetic he really is. When Beth originally asked him to choose whether she should stay or leave, she specifically told him to make the decision for her. She wanted to know what Rick actually wanted. Rick made a clone and copied Beth's memories into it. But here's the kicker. He then deliberately turned his back and had a machine randomly switch the containers around. Rick purposely made it so he'd never know which Beth was which. Rick couldn't handle making a real choice, so he rigged it so he'd never have to face the consequences. He wanted both a space daughter and a home daughter without having to admit he liked one better than the other. This is pure Rick cowardice. When forced to make an actual parental decision, Rick just noped out completely. He'd rather live in confusion than risk feeling guilty about picking wrong. The randomization shows Rick can't commit to anything, even which version of his own daughter he wants around. Rick needed both options, so he'd never have to feel bad about his choice. Then, Rick erased his memory of the whole thing, which makes it even worse. He not only avoided the choice but forgot he avoided it. Rick wanted to pretend he never chickened out in the first place. The bomb in Space Beth's neck shows Rick's paranoid control issues. He couldn't just let her go, he needed a way to kill her if she came back and made his life complicated. Rick would literally murder his daughter rather than deal with messy emotions. Both Beths end up completely screwed over by Rick's selfishness. Space Beth spent years thinking she was real, only to find out Rick doesn't even know. Earth Beth discovered her whole life might be fake, and Rick doesn't care enough to remember. Rick's casual attitude is the worst part. He treats this like just another weird adventure, instead of completely destroying his daughter's sense of identity. Rick messed with Beth's entire reality and then forgot about it. Both Beths refuse to watch Rick's stupid memory because they've realized it doesn't matter. Rick is a terrible father to both versions, so who cares which one is real? Rick only wants to know because he's curious, not because he actually cares about them. The episode ends with Rick sitting alone, realizing he's a terrible father while both Beths want nothing to do with him. His emotional cowardice finally drove away the person he supposedly loves most. The randomization also shows Rick's complete disrespect for Beth's choice. She specifically asked him to decide, trusting him with one of the biggest decisions of her life. Rick's response was to dodge responsibility and then forget he ever had it. When both Beths call Rick a piece of garbage either way, they've finally seen through his manipulation. It doesn't matter which one is real because Rick has failed both of them equally. His refusal to choose hurt them both. Rick's handling of the Beth situation shows his approach to all relationships. Use technology to avoid emotional responsibility, then forget about it when things get messy. Rick would rather clone his problems than actually solve them. The whole thing reveals Rick's fundamental inability to be a real parent. Making hard choices and living with the consequences is what parenting is about. Rick just wanted the fun parts without any of the actual responsibility. After refusing to choose which Beth is real, Rick then causes chaos by turning America into mutant turkeys. Rick's turkey trick goes wrong when the wrong bird gets the president's DNA, creating a mutant turkey president who turns all of America's turkeys into a monster army. In Thanksploitation Spectacular, Rick's usual pardon scam becomes a national disaster. Rick and Morty break into government buildings looking for treasure and accidentally destroy a bunch of monuments. To get out of trouble, Rick does his usual thing, turns into a turkey to trick the president into giving him a pardon on Thanksgiving. But the president is ready this time. He turns Marines into tracking chips so Rick can't blend in. The president even becomes a turkey himself to fight Rick during the ceremony. During their turkey brawl, Rick knocks out the president's tracking chip and a random turkey swallows it. The Marines grab the wrong bird and inject it with presidential DNA, creating this gross turkey human thing that thinks it's the real president. The turkey president immediately starts messing everything up. He makes giant turkey monster guards, sells off states for money, and begins turning every turkey in America into super soldiers. Some get as big as buildings. Congress loves the turkey president because he keeps paying them. When the real president tries to stop him, Congress votes to keep the turkey in charge instead. The turkey president basically bought the whole government. Things get crazy when the turkey president launches the Washington Monument into space with a device that can transform all American turkeys at once. Rick and Morty have to fly up there to stop it, while the president fights his turkey copy. The episode reveals America's real history is totally fake. Turns out ancient aliens that look like pilgrims and Native Americans came to Earth to fight turkey dinosaurs that were eating humans. These aliens have been sleeping under Washington, D.C. ever since. The real president wakes up the aliens to fight the turkey army. They easily destroy the mutant turkeys, but only after the things nearly took over the country. Rick acts like this whole mess is no big deal, even though his stupid plan almost led to America being ruled by a mutant turkey dictator. He just wanted to avoid getting in trouble for breaking stuff. The turkey president's takeover shows how easily politicians can be bought off. Congress ditched the real president the second someone offered them more money. Rick's turkey scheme is typical. Rick used crazy science to solve personal problems without thinking about what might go wrong. His need to avoid consequences for his actions creates an even bigger disaster. The transformation process itself is disturbing to watch. When Marines get turned into turkeys, they're forced to swallow tracking pills and get injected with turkey DNA. One Marine named Coop has to leave his pregnant wife Mary Lou to become a turkey soldier. The whole thing is presented like military duty, but it's actually body horror. Rick's casual attitude towards species transformation shows his complete disregard for biological integrity. He's done the turkey trick so many times that he treats it like changing clothes. Rick doesn't care about the psychological trauma of becoming a different species. The turkey president's reign reveals how fragile American democracy really is. Within hours of taking power, he's selling states and creating a military force loyal only to him. The The fact that Congress goes along with it shows how easily the system can be corrupted with enough bribes. The turkey army becomes increasingly monstrous as the episode progresses. What starts as simple turkey-human hybrids evolves into giant monsters that can destroy buildings. The turkey president keeps pushing the genetic modifications further and further. Rick's involvement in creating this disaster is typical of his character. He causes massive problems through reckless behavior, then acts like it's someone else's job to fix them. Rick never takes responsibility for the consequences of his actions. The episode also shows the president's own ego problems. Instead of just arresting Rick, he gets drawn into this elaborate cat-and-mouse game because he can't stand being outsmarted. Both Rick and the president are too proud to back down. The Marines turned into turkeys suffer long-term psychological damage. In the post-credits scene, Coop has PTSD and starts pecking at blueberries in a grocery store while his wife cries. The transformation left him permanently traumatized, but society refuses to pay for his health care. The alien reveal at the end completely rewrites American history. Everything people believed about the founding of the country was a lie, designed to cover up the real story of alien intervention. The Pilgrims and Native Americans were actually extraterrestrial allies fighting turkey monsters. Rick's destruction of the Washington Monument with the same laser that started the whole mess shows his pattern of solving problems by causing bigger problems. Instead of carefully disabling the turkey transformation device, he just blows everything up. The turkey president's final act is trying to explode himself to kill the real president, showing that even fake leaders would rather destroy everything than lose power. This mirrors real-world political behavior where leaders choose chaos over admitting defeat. The episode ends with the president telling Morty to feel thankful, despite learning that American exceptionalism is built on lies. This suggests that patriotism requires willful ignorance of uncomfortable truths. Rick's turkey disaster represents his fundamental selfishness. He'd rather risk national catastrophe than face consequences for his actions. The fact that he's done this multiple times shows he never learns from his mistakes. After causing chaos with mutant turkeys, Rick ruins Unity's life by dragging them back into toxic partying. Rick completely ruins what might be the only healthy relationship he's ever had when he meets up with Unity, this hive mind creature that used to date him. Through pure selfishness and manipulation, Rick turns Unity from a responsible leader running an entire planet into a drunk mess who has to abandon everything just to get away from him. So Unity had actually gotten their life together after breaking up with Rick. This hive mind controls a whole alien planet and made it into what they think is paradise. No wars, no crime, everyone's got jobs and healthcare. Unity's literally running hospitals and keeping millions of people alive. They tell Rick they don't do drugs anymore because why would you need to escape reality when you've made it perfect? Unity found purpose in actually helping people, instead of just partying all the time. But Rick can't stand that Unity moved on without him. The second he sees Unity has changed, Rick starts trying to drag them back down to his level. He acts like Unity's growth is boring and starts pressuring them to party like they used to. When Unity says no, Rick spots some alien materials and realizes he can make drugs out of them. Even though Unity clearly doesn't want to, Rick guilts them with all this, "Come on, it's for old times manipulation bullshit." The moment Unity gives in, everything goes to hell. Rick pushes them into crazier and crazier stuff, massive orgies with thousands of people, dangerous stunts, getting completely wasted. Unity gets so drunk they start losing control of their population. People snap back to their normal personalities and immediately start a race war over what their nipples look like. Citizens who lived peacefully for years suddenly remember they hate each other and start killing people in the streets. Unity's trying to run critical systems while completely hammered. They admit they're too drunk to fly helicopters or operate the hospitals, keeping everyone alive. This hive mind that used to perfectly coordinate millions of lives can barely talk straight. Rick sees all this chaos happening and just tells Unity to keep partying. When Morty and Summer point out that people are literally dying, Rick tells them to shut up and mind their own business. The worst part is when Morty and Summer directly call Rick out for being toxic. Instead of taking any responsibility, Rick gets nasty and defensive. He calls Summer a hyper-emotional, needy little human and says he can tolerate his family but doesn't actually give a crap about them. He tells Unity his grandkids are just jealous losers who want to make Unity weaker. Rick's actively trying to cut Unity off from anyone who might help them see how messed up this relationship is. Unity finally realizes what's really going on. They write these heartbreaking goodbye letters explaining that they're attracted to Rick for the same reason they can't be with him. Rick never changes, and being around him makes Unity lose who they are completely. Unity writes that Rick's actually better at taking over people than they are. He changes everyone around him without even trying, but he can't change himself at all. Unity sees that Rick's self-destructive behavior always ends up destroying everyone who cares about him. The fallout is brutal for everyone. Unity abandons the planet they spent years building, leaving millions of confused people and destroyed infrastructure behind. Rick gets so depressed he builds a death ray in his garage and almost kills himself, only surviving because he passes out drunk before it fires. An entire civilization gets screwed over because Rick couldn't handle his ex being happy without him. Rick's behavior here shows exactly how selfish he really is. He couldn't stand that Unity found meaning and happiness after leaving him, so he systematically destroyed everything they built. Rick didn't want Unity back because he loved them. He wanted to prove Unity couldn't actually grow or change. When Unity chose being healthy over Rick's chaos, Rick took it personally and decided to burn it all down. What makes this even worse is how Rick uses his intelligence to be manipulative. He knows exactly how to push Unity's buttons because they used to date. Rick's not just being randomly destructive, he's weaponizing personal knowledge against someone who trusted him. He creates powerful drugs and uses emotional manipulation because he understands Unity's psychology. Unity leaving Rick creates consequences that last for the whole series. They're one of the few people who successfully escape Rick's orbit by recognizing how toxic he is. Unity's letters basically give a complete psychological breakdown of why relationships with Rick always fail. The episode shows that Rick's smart and charismatic, which makes him attractive, but his complete inability to grow makes him poison to anyone who gets close. The whole disaster could have been avoided if Rick just respected that Unity had changed and moved on. Instead, Rick chose his own nostalgia and need for chaos over Unity's well-being and millions of people's safety. Rick literally destroyed a functioning civilization because he couldn't handle his ex doing better without him. That's some next-level petty and destructive behavior, even for Rick. If you enjoyed our video today, subscribe to our channel for more videos like these.